The story of Craft Guy. When he was 16, he decided to become an adventurer. It has been 4 years since then. During this time, he worked as a team that was difficult to talk about the future. They decided to get rid of Craft because they considered him a temporary member. One of the guys closed his face with his hand. He doubted whether Craft is a magician. Craft almost did not use magic and seemed quite useless. Craft has swallowed hard when he heard it. Everyone was surprised. His magic seal is fake. He only knows simple spells. Craft with trembling hands held staff. The girl thought with regret that he was a weak magician. He has no talent for adventure. He was painful, but he had to agree. This time the group was really right. Craft was kicked again. He wept came to the Adventurers Guild. The secretary realized what happened, and he confirmed it with a nod. It was difficult for her to say it, but she also thought it was not suitable for this work. This has happened earlier. Craft no longer remembers how many times he has been expelled from groups. He tried. He really wanted to become strong. His combat spells were weak. He could not cope with even weak monsters. He often had to call for help. The guy knew only simple magic. For example, he could create drinking water, but it took a long time. Others could not count on him. He was kicked out. He was forced to sign documents. He was told that it was not necessary to come. Craft silently apologized, but did not know what to do next. Then the secretary mentioned the request from the Guild of Builders. He heard about her first. He asked what task he was offered. She explained that they were giving a new task. The construction of the village near the border path begins. This requires someone who can stay there for a long time. Craft was just sent like an extra person. Its absence did not affect the guild. The secretary hoped that he would not be offended. She wanted to give a job to someone who is weak in battle. Craft didn't want to take it, but I didn't have a choice. The secretary was surprised by the boy's decision. Seeing that he was serious, she promised to prepare documents quickly. He was expelled not only from the group, but also from the guild. A new energy has emerged inside. This step seemed a turning point. He has now associated his fate with the craft of the construction worker. He was sure that everything would change for the better. A loud roar was suddenly behind. He turned and saw several guys who pulled heavy load. The media hurried, adjusting each other. They squeezed through a crowd of workers standing in the yard. One of them told the other to spend money wisely. Only now did Craft notice how many people are around. Suddenly, someone called him. The master asked and learned that a young man from the Adventurers Guild. He came to register for the construction of a border village. The master rejoiced in the newcomer, slammed him on his shoulder, and thanked him for his help. He ordered the brigade not to relax and led Craft to the headquarters. In the construction guild, they were met by a quiet leader. He was already waiting for the newcomer. He shook Craft's hand. He noticed that the name is well suited to the future architect. Friendly cheered the guy. During the registration of documents, the manager saw the word mag in the profession column. Craft said awkwardly that only simple spells. The chief decided that the young man did not pass the seal. He suggested checking his hidden potential. The guy was born with a large stock of mana, so the seal could give him a lot of strength. There was a servant in the hall who could confirm it. The assistant sighed, remembering the cost of the procedure. The head assured that everything was already paid. Craft was surprised by their benevolence and suspected another intention. He doubted the power of the seal, but agreed to check. The chief called Jared San with a gray beard. San slowly rose from the chair and went closer. The old man looked closely at the young man and agreed that he needed to check the heraldic seal. Craft stretched his palm. San activated the artifact. A bright light flashed around. The guy enveloped the shine of the analysis. Harold's eyes were wide open. The result was surprised. He bounced and said it was impossible. Craft and others were alarmed. An experienced servant explained that the young man's seal does not approach his mana. It is so inappropriate that its use can damage health. The seal was not suitable. This greatly struck Craft. He suddenly realized that it was constantly hindering his abilities. The herald, which was helped by the diagnosis, insisted on immediately changing the coat of arms. It is dangerous to use a harmful seal. The problem had to be solved urgently. If the guy agrees, the master will rewrite the dam immediately. Craft asked which coat of arms to choose. The old man said it was a special case. The coat of arms with great force was best. Such a coat of arms is very rare even in the world of magic. The guy was suitable for the Twilight Alchemist. It is a level worthy of gods. The attendees did not expect it. The head of the guild took the young man by his shoulders and joyfully called him a Twilight Alchemist. This was not yet. He grabbed the guy with joy and almost shook him. Harold was also surprised and could not believe for a long time. He explained that the usual and Twilight rank was very different. Alchemists and so very valuable. Twilight rank was considered unattainable. He has not seen him yet. The Twilight Alchemist is the next level after the usual, as knightly seals are raised to the saints and dragon. This meant that Kraft could be the strongest alchemist among all, regardless of their level. Jared said no one has reached this rank yet. Therefore, the name was conditional, but its content was clear. Having mastered the alchemy, the owner of this seal can theoretically create gold. Harold asked if the young man wanted to change the coat of arms. Kraft mentioned the last 4 years and realized that it was his opportunity. He said goodbye to the old seal and asked to replace it. The old man lifted the staff, focused on energy, and reassured the guy. He clearly said the census formula. The flow of light went to Kraft. He officially received the Twilight Alchemist. The young man looked at a new radiant mark on his palm in surprise. The clean and strong mana, which was depressed, suddenly escaped. She enveloped his body with a wave of power. Kraft felt a mana flowing along his veins. Now it was a real power, not just a dream. The old seal disappeared. In its place appeared a coat of arms with a warm golden glow. It seemed that the gods themselves gave him this crown. Harold was surprised. He said he had never seen anything like that. He needs to tell this story to other keeper. Kraft thanked and felt as if he had just been born. The old man only nodded. His calling is to help the chosen. Suddenly, a passionate woman's exclamation, full of sincere surprise, sounded in silence. The bodice was small but bold. She first saw the alchemist of the highest rank. The bodice did not hide her admiration. The girl went to the border village. She congratulated Kraft. The young man was a little confused, but also greeted her. He thought she was still very young, but her confident voice showed experience. The presence of the alchemist made the expedition more confident. It turned out that the bodice manages the construction detachment. For Kraft, it was unexpected. The head of the guild hesitated whether to send such a valuable master so far. The girl hugged a newcomer and clearly said that the route could not be changed. Kraft needs a detachment. The leader wanted to deny, but the young man was red. Despite the fragile posture, the bodice was unwavering. The leader recalled the nomious blood and the great age of the girl. From this, the girl glanced at him with a sharp look. The bodice, having heard about the years, sharply grabbed a heavy hammer. The head was scared, fell down, and began to ask for mercy. The girl dropped the weapon after the apology. Kraft was surprised what this respectable man could be defenseless. The young man mentally wanted the hammer to hang a little over him. He was inconvenient to watch a new partner jokes with his authorities. The head joke again angry. She struck the floor with a hammer and broke the boards into pieces. The wooden coating was scattered. The girl shrugged. She knew that guild would pay for repair. She firmly said that her team would pay for costs. No one denied. Kraft was silent and did not defend the leader. The bodice was low but very strong. It scared the young man. She was a little reassured by the words of the head, which called her little. To change the topic, he said that the girl has probably have a noble origin from the border graph. These words finally puzzled Kraft. Kraft has never heard that one noble man controls the border village, but his head decided to negotiate with him so that everyone would calm down. The guy was worried, although the chief said that they would cope with any problem with a thyroid and alchemist. It was the first real order of Kraft as an alchemist. He promised to do everything possible. The bodice sincerely supported the team. The next morning, the detachment was ready. The girls said that the carts were loaded very quickly. Almost half of the guild went on the road. Dozens of carts carried out equipment and stocks. They took everything necessary for unknown lands. Kraft took his things. After receiving the alchemist's seal, he learned to use the spatial storage. He studied this skill all night. He proposed to move the luggage. Comrades were lost. The bodice advised not to ask unnecessary questions. Spatial storage is a rare skill. No one knew that Kraft had such an ability. Magic allows you to store many things. The head and bodice pushed the young man. They ordered him to disassemble the contents of the first cart. Kraft saw a large bunch of cargo and doubted. The chief said that only one trolley should be handled. The carts were fully loaded with brick and water. It was the perfect test for space and endurance of mana. The guy gathered with the spirit, activated the spell, and directed him for great transport. The bright flash illuminated everything, and the cart had disappeared as if it had never been. He easily turned the cargo back, so he checked whether he was controlling the new force. The leader was surprised and rejoiced. The bodice said she had never seen such a strong weaving. Only now did Kraft realize that he could earn as a freight magician without alchemy. The young man was praised and took up the second visa. The chairman ordered to fit other transport closer. The chief showed a few more carts. Kraft gained strength and decided to check the boundaries of his space. To the surprise of his comrades, he quickly hit a few loaded carts and was hardly tired. Friends said the guy was very skillful. The preparation became faster thanks to him. The bodice thanked him with a warm smile. Kraft rejoiced and worried simultaneously because of the passionate faces of his comrades. The head promised the boy 20% of the rental of carts. It seemed like a trifle for him. The manager warned that the free work of the Twilight Alchemist can cause suspicion and unnecessary problems. Kraft hit a lot of cargo. This gave the detachment benefit and profit. He secured himself for a few good months. The young man looks at the golden mark and hopes that the new seal will become strong. The bodice came up, waved her hand, and said not to use formalities. Now they are friends, and Kraft gladly turned to her. The head said that with Kraft and the bodice, the detachment boldly goes to the village. The girl wished the young man success. He thanked her for her support. The guy became a Twilight Alchemist and confidently went to a new life. The bodice led him forward. Previously, he was expelled from the group because of weak magic. Now everything has changed. The strongest seal gave a craft that he really suits him. Now he goes to the border as the main alchemist of the expedition. In his thoughts, he promised to show everyone his true potential. Initially, the ritual of the wires of the colonists seemed strange. Then the bodice explained that it was needed to success on the road. She only hoped for the fast end when she heard the order to go on. There was a row of soldiers ahead. They walked into one tact. The head recalled the request to hold a modest ceremony. The guard strictly interrupted him. The soldier said travelers should be honored because they have gone a long way. The young Zaid in a parade uniform nodded his head, remembering the old acquaintance. When the honorary guest came, everyone stood on his knee except Kraft surprised. They showed him his respect. The bodice has already bowed. She gently pulled the young man down and whispered that he also needed to worship. Zaid showed a gesture that an informal meeting is now. He made it clear that it was not necessary to bow. It was then that it became known that his younger brother will become the head of the new settlement. Young Kyle Gisatl is a fragile teenager. He always followed his shy sister. He had to become the head of the colony. The head of the detachment silently swallowed saliva. The bodice felt anxiety. Soon Kraft also felt her. Kyle congratulated the expedition. He presented a younger sister of Mina, who shyly looked out of him. The girl calmly greeted. The brother said the mine would be with him for his personal reasons. The chairman recalled the risks of a long road and suggested changing the composition of children. Zaid refused cold. The older brother translated all responsibility to Kale. He hinted that in the event of a failure, Kyle would look incapable. The accompaniment shuddered from the ruthless statement. In the voice of the patron felt icy notes. Kraft noticed how a quiet despair had a quiet despair in his eyes. He realized that the guy was feeling helpless. Zaid called the test for his brother to prove his strength. He smiled with a mockery. Kraft did not tolerate cynicism. He promised to help the colony and protect the reputation of the young lord. The bodice quickly translated the view between the interlocutors. She realized that their intentions were contrary to each other. The young man felt an affinity with Kyle because he was once superfluous. He decided to support the guy and follow him. He promised to show you that he was not in vain. He decided to come back with the victory faster than he would have time to clip. The patron first was silent, embarrassed. Then he laughed, deciding that the craft jokes. On farewell, he recalled that the main thing is the result of the mission. Luck is of secondary importance. He wished his brothers success. Kraft mentally decided that this ceremony was the worst in his life. The bodice did not understand his irony and shook him angrily. The head took the guy by his shoulders and praised for the courage. Kyle bowed and politely asked to explain why Kraft said so sharply. The bodice leaned with the head in front of a young lord. They recognized their rudeness and asked for forgiveness. Kraft named his name, admitted a mistake, and said that the situation reminded him of his own failures. The young man told about years when he was a helpless adventurer and did not justify the hopes of other people. Although the circumstances were unclear, he wanted to support Kyle so that he would not feel confused. The shy lord squeezed the camisola. He recognized his weakness. He promised to make every effort. His sincere speech moved everyone. Everyone wanted to help. Kyle apologized and promised to do everything he could. He also asked Kraft to support him. Kraft smiled warmly and remembered that working together, comrades confirmed that they were ready to fight for victory. People remembered that Kyle supported moderate taxes and kindness. They decided to work together at full force. The young man cursed with gratitude. Others at once supported him. A little time has passed. The detachment and Craft left the construction guild of the forest road. It was shorter but dangerous. In 2 days, they went only a quarter of the way. Their pace was slow. The bodice and the main character went at the head of the column. They often looked around to make sure everyone is going together. Due to high speed, everyone was tired and asked for a short break. Kyle and Mina are tired even in the van. The bodice agreed to make a stop, although it delayed the hike. In the evening, Craft ignited a campfire. The bodice realized that it is very difficult to follow the strict graph. The young man remembered the endurance potion. It is a simple and effective drink. It extends the time of vigor. The problem was in the lack of herbs, because for the usual recipe for one serving requires a whole bucket of plants. Craft received a new seal of the Twilight Alchemist. Now he hoped to make a quality elixir even from a spoonful of dried healing herbs. The young man started the experiment. He scored a mug of water, pulled a spoonful of dried herbs from the storage, and poured them into the vessel. He focused on the alchemical manu, and for the first time created the elixir of endurance. It was a great achievement for a novice alchemist. A thick steam was raised from the bowl. Craft hesitated. The bodice suspected that the potion was ready and used the magic of evaluation. The girl came to her senses and sharply faded. She was convinced that the young man had prepared a decoction. At first she thought it was a joke, because the liquid had a very strange appearance. The bodies of the bodice lit up. Before her lay the elixir of legendary quality. Craft looked at the glass. It turned out that the strength of this drink is stored for 1,000 years. It works for half a day and gives great endurance. The bodice took the boy by her shoulders and started shaking. She asked how he was able to create a rarity that she could not do even in a year. The alchemist was confused, but promised to prepare the potion for everyone tomorrow at dawn. In the morning, he and the bodice added the elixir to vegetable soup. The taste of the dish surprised everyone, and the satellites asked the supplement. Yesterday, everyone was standing. Now there is a lot of energy in the detachment. Everyone runs camp like young men in competitions. The horses got drunk from the bucket. They now stood and were full of strength. The animals looked healthy. It was clearly visible. Kraft stretched out a bottle of Kyle and Mines. He assured that the drink was completely safe. However, the guards stopped him. Alfred and Persia are the guards of the young lord. They wanted to know where this strong elixir came from. It seemed strange to them that such a strong remedy appeared suddenly. Kyle tried to reassure his companions. The guards moved the owner's trusting words. However, they still doubted, so they decided to try the broth themselves. Alfred snatched a bottle into Kraft and drank everything in one sip. Then he grabbed his chest sharply. He kneeled, then stood sharply. His body suddenly swept strong energy. It surprised everyone around. Power raged in it. The attendees froze and watched. The energy overwhelmed the warrior. At first, Persia was scared. She then noticed that there were no side effects. The potion was safe and effective. Alfred's eyes were burning. He felt the power of the mountain to turn, but suddenly the alarm came. The camp was hunted with goblins. Only Persia realized the danger. The guard rushed forward. He left the satellites behind and stood the monster in front of the crowd. The toothed goblins knocked knives and wooden sticks. They cheered each other with a disgusting cry. Alfred struck heavily, spent his sword in the air, and ended with a powerful blow, called Wolf. New opportunities helped him perform complex techniques without fatigue. It surprised even the warrior himself. An elixir camp worked faster than the plan. Kraft decided not to stop and wanted to complete the task twice as fast. They overcame the path in a week, though they planned to go the moon, stopped to make sure that the destinations got. People were silent because everything looked unusual. Kraft understood their reaction. He believed that this place was perfect for rebuilding the settlement. The plain gave a lot of space for new plans. Although this place was considered a wasteland, travelers once lived here. Kraft learned from the bodice and was surprised. The girl smiled and said that her childhood had passed here and the best memories remained. She gently leaned against the old wooden column and rejoiced in his return. Suddenly, she heard distant voices who called them. Kyle suggested discussing the case before construction. On the advice of Alfred, he gathered everyone in a circle. Lifa liked the idea. People loved Kyle and wanted to listen to him. The girl went to call her friends. Kraft only now realized that this is the city where the bodice was born. He decided not to ask questions, not to touch her past. He thought how to cheer a girl. Suddenly, he heard Kyle calling him. He realized that he was delayed and immediately apologized for his mind. Kyle looked seriously and persistently. He wanted to talk closer. Kraft was confused and retreated a little. Young Lord said that thanks to Kraft feels safe. He asked not to adhere to the formalities. However, the guards watched closely at each of its movements. Kyle clenched his palm and said he needed sincere conversations. Without this, he will not be able to reveal his potential next to such a mentor. Lord looked at Kraft sincerely and athletically, almost childish. Kraft looked because he knew he would not be able to refuse. For a few seconds, the boys looked into each other's eyes with sympathy. They were silent and thinking about their own. Kraft eventually agreed. He decided that if Kyle wants simplicity, officiality could be postponed. The main thing is that Kyle does not complain. Lord was glad. Persia advised the hero not to behave too freely with the nobles. Alpha had strictly made the owner's decision. After a brief meeting, this area was chosen for a border outpost. Kyle was instructed to manage the project with the construction team. Behind the ridge of the mountains were fertile plains surrounded by forests. The settlement had to recover and strengthen. The young manager promised to try on the full. He asked everyone to support him in a new position. The crowd raised his hands at the same time. People approved the perseverance of the young lord and shouted words of support. Persia and Alpha did not restrain their tears and praised the inspired speech of their ward. Kraft noticed that Mina had always been held near her brother and is now quietly hiding in the shade and silent. She is ashamed to speak. When the hero looked at her, the girl became awkward from his gaze. He reached out, inviting her to stay side by side to reassure. Mina raised her eyes in surprise. She suddenly hugged Kraft in her eyes, not understanding what he was doing. At this time, Kyle already wanted to announce the news. The young man asked everyone to look back. People obeyed and did as he said. Everyone looked at the alchemist, who stood in the arms of Mina. Kyle praised the strength of Elixir and his friend's talent. The captured workers raised Kraft on their hands and began to applaud, although he asked to be restrained. People threw the hero up several times as a symbol of hope, despite his denial. The bodice smiled and said that trust means great responsibility. Kraft at this time asked to stop. He gasped with attention. He asked to finish the celebration quickly because he was afraid that Paphos was tired of everyone. When the ovations ended, the hero exhaled. The bodice suggested getting acquainted during work. Everyone agreed. Now the bodice was responsible for temporary housing. She emphasized to read the project guide. The residents readily performed the task. The bodice thanked the adventurers for the escort and prepared a reward. They gave up money and asked for a bottle of endurance potions. A drop of elixir craft was more expensive than gold. He agreed to take the bottle, although the bodice did not approve the idea. The girl warned that this rare tincture requires a special flask. Otherwise, her strength will disappear. The satellites did not pay attention to this warning. Kraft calmly said that the potion would remain effective for 1,000 years, even in a simple bag. It surprised all those present. He said there are flasks that can keep a drink for billion years. This caused admiration. Someone joked that alchemists were really doing miracles. The adventurers joyfully took the bottle. They graduated from the first stage of the project and thanked for a generous gift. One builder showed a spacious home and suggested that Lifa and Kraft settle there. The girl was surprised and jumped. She did not understand why he should live with Kraft. The man explained that it was the most premises from the available. The bodice murmured uncertainly. Kraft only suggested why she was embarrassed. The young man thought that it was uncomfortable to live with him. The girl denied sharply and asked not to complicate the situation. Kraft considered a cohabitation to be ordinary for members of the guild, but it only embarrassed the bodice. She blushed and said that they would have to share the room. It looked suspicious. The employee said there would be separate rooms inside. He asked the girl to calm down. The guild provisional headquarters was in this house. This does not violate the rules of decency. The bodice exhaled with relief. Her cheeks were burning because the imagination showed unnecessary. Kyle approached. The girl accused the employee of misunderstanding to relieve tension. Then she joked and buried Kraft in the sand. This was scared by Lord. Kyle suggested to dig a well to be distracted. He promised not to annoy the bodice anymore about himself. The river was side by side, but walking on the water every day seemed to be a waste of time, even with the elixir of endurance. Kraft agreed, your own well will make life easier. Kyle hoped for the skill of the alchemist. The bodice doubted that finding the aquifer would be easy. The hero assured that the concentrated magic will help to call the source under his feet. The bodice asked how a simple alchemist could cause a flow of water. Kraft replied that he studied water magic before changing the seal. Once upon a time, the magician had a lot of mana. She almost got out of control. Now, with a twilight seal, it can control me without loss. The bodice was surprised by such a confident confession, but the young man said he knew an even better way to find water. Kraft clicked his fingers and suggested trying the idea right away. Kyle and the bodice were surprised. They did not expect the alchemist to be such tricks. The The bodice remembered the old way of the Orwis. Kraft confirmed this by lifting the stone. He was going to turn him into a drop. The stone has acquired an alchemical shine and became a transparent gem. Now he is a conductor who will light up when he feels an underground vein. Such a pendulum will help to find water without Kraft, but there was one problem. To create a drop requires a magical nucleus. The bodice asked what was missing. Needed stones that fall out of monsters. The quality of these stones depends on the rank of the monster, which they won. It is difficult to obtain a crystal orca. The guards do not leave Kale. The mercenaries have already gone. The bodice proposed to buy meat in the city, but frequent purchases would be too expensive. Kraft decided to hunt himself. The thoughts were interrupted. He ran out of the thickets and warned of danger. In the forest found a large orc settlement, more than 20 creatures. For the peasants, it was a real catastrophe. The bodice agreed. 20 orcs are a great danger, but collecting ingredients is also important. She said she was ready to fight. Kraft suddenly suggested that he go to intelligence of enemy power. The girl did not believe his plan because she did not hope for the former weak magician. However, the guy was confident. He recalled Kyle. He was weak in magic, but knows how to explore the terrain, find useful herbs, and do many daily cases. Kraft always performed imperceptible intelligence tasks. He confidently took responsibility for himself. The bodice sighed heavily. She recognized the experience of the young man. He asked her to look in his eyes and honestly trust his plan. Kraft gathered on the road and promised to be careful. Kyle asked him to be kept, and the bodice did not risk it. The guy squeezed his fists and said that Goblin would win without being wrapped. He moved through prickly thickets. The elasticity of endurance did not relieve fatigue. The soil was gross and the branches scratched their face. The foggy forest is very insidious. Here, foreigners are often attacked by surprise. Earlier, Kraft was looking for shorter paths and repeatedly risked getting lost. A sharp crunch came behind. He turned quickly. There could be a danger behind thick huts. He looked carefully from behind the bush. In front of me was Orcha's parking lot. Meat was fried on the fires. The orcs broke it with their hands and ate. The alchemist saw 20 to 30 orcs. This is enough to check the new force in a real battle. That is why he insisted on the intelligence himself. He wanted to check what his alchemical magic was capable of. However, he has not yet been confident. The dry views of comrades on farewell showed that authority should be restored by actions, not words. Once he avoided everything dangerous, he now believes in the Twilight coat of arms. Escape for him now is only a spare plan, not the only way out. The young man reached out and applied the icy prison of underwater depths. Manny Wave moved to the enemy camp. All settlements immediately covered transparent icy blocks. They shone at dusk. Kraft did not believe the eyes. The first real blow immediately paralyzed 30 orcs. Yesterday he could only create a few drops of water. Now he was in front of his own icy masterpiece. The young man felt gratitude for Harold. He realized what combat magic should be like. For a moment he imagined how the royal yard surprised. The euphoria disappeared. The clothes were covered with icy hoarfrost, and it became very cold. The body began to lose heat. Realizing that he could freeze from his own spell, he quickly assembled magic stones and went back. The cold broke to the bones, but the thought of a successful raid warmed more than the fire. Returning to the camp, Kraft told his friends that the orcs were destroyed. He poured a handful of shiny gems in front of them. Persia with Alphid immediately decided to strengthen the defense of new lands with trophy cores of mana. The first independent exit of the Twilight Alchemist was successful. The enemy won, the resources received. The team believed in its power even more. The news of the victory over 33 orcs surprised everyone. Kraft confessed that he almost turned into an icy statue during his spell. He calmly said to the question that he had coped with magic. The answer was surprised even more because he was expelled earlier because of weak magical abilities. The girl quickly apologized for her harsh words. She still did not understand why such force suddenly appeared in the loser. Kraft explained that the new Twilight coat of arms gave access to the lands that were previously unavailable. Kyle was sincerely delighted for him as a close friend. The young man dreamed of a time when everyone would see how easily he finds magical stones. He hoped that people would understand. Now their lives would become richer. He had enough strength to become an adventurer again. Now he wanted to work with his comrades and share victories with them. Kraft got a stone pendulum from the hiding place. He winked with Kyle and promised to find a source of water as well as he found the harness. He explained that the drop would light up if the underground lived. All you have to do is walk and monitor the flickering of the gem. The alchemist took a few steps. The pendulum suddenly illuminated with bright light. The alchemist confidently showed a shovel the place where the well is dug. The workers dug the land carefully. The bodice took the stream of craft and told him to relax after night work. An hour later, cold water appeared from the pit. The bodice laughed and moved craft on her hands. She rejoiced in the first handful of clean water. The residents came to noise. They were surprised that the source was found on the first attempt. This was done by the same guy who destroyed the orc yesterday. Now everyone was sure that there is a Twilight Alchemist in the village. They are thirst and enemies. The bodice has already prepared plans for the construction of a well. In a few days, the well was laid with a stone. Transparent water flowed generously. People felt true safety. The next morning, at breakfast, Kraft heard a quiet good morning. He turned and saw Mine, who was shyly hiding behind his brother's back. A shy girl holds a pick. She shows that she wants to help like older. She asks to teach her to dig. The alchemist smiled gently and promised to show the most convenient grip. Kyle was proudly watched by his sister, took the first step towards independence. The bodice brought fresh cakes and joked that the mine would be strong for a long time because the dough has a little legendary elixir. Kraft thanked with warmth. Even a drop of his tincture made breakfasts delicious and gave a lot of energy. It was shot in a bone. People smiled and made plans. The well was filled with water. The land was waiting for sowing. People were ready for new achievements. Kraft did not hear her words. Kyle noticed that for a shy mine, even a simple greeting is a big step. The young man rejoiced in this. Mina was always hiding behind her brother. She was interested in Kraft more than just shyness, but Kraft himself thought it was the usual behavior of a noble girl. When Kyle learned that the bodice was managing the construction, he allowed the alchemist to spend the day on experiments and the creation of infusions. Although everyone agreed, there is a slight inconvenience in the air. Everyone was silently thinking how to fill the pauses. Mina carefully took the edge of his cloak. Kraft leaned down and suggested that she thinks, but Mine did not share their thoughts. Persia thought that Lady just wanted to be near the alchemist. He decided not to pay attention to it. The young man looked at the guard for a moment, but quickly turned away and returned to work. Persia was again surprised by his spatial storage. Kraft got some mana crystals and was genuinely surprised by his capabilities. He clenched the stone in his hand. The stone became a shiny powder. He poured the powder into a large dash with the main infusion. The alchemical flow twisted the liquid. Even without analysis, it was clear the healing power is very high. He suggested hiding the stock in the pantry. Then he noticed that the mine, with his eyes lowered, carefully monitors every movement of the master. Persia wanted to pick up the ward, but saw her genuine interest and allowed her to stay. Kraft greeted the guests with a good smile. The alchemist accidentally told the guard a pleasant compliment and suggested to stay. It suddenly surprised her. She blushed and strictly warned that she did not tolerate light-hearted jokes. In her look, there was still real kindness. While the potion became thicker, the mine again pulled it by the sleeve. She seemed to say something important. Kraft did not understand why she turned red. Persia smiled slightly and suggested that the girl was increasingly passionate about the master. He finished work, inspected the rows of barrels, and thought that it would be enough for any trouble. He thought of testing the medicine in practice, but he would not harm for it. Sudden shouts from the yard interrupted his thoughts. The alchemist ran out to find out the cause of anxiety. In the yard, workers cautiously put a wounded young hunter Gitero on a stretcher. The crowd parted to give way to help. Partner Gitero explained that the hunter found a small group of goblins. He underestimated them and stopped being careful. The Mane calmed down when he learned that the wounded himself destroyed the rest of Tarviuk. Now there is no danger. Kraft ordered the return of all field workers to the camp. They will wait until experienced fighters check the area. One adventurer mentioned the new medical elixir. He conveyed Jitter Alchemist, who promised to help. Kraft examined the wounds. He saw deep cuts and torn tissues. This required immediate help. Persia was surprised that the hunter did not depart. 6 goblins are dangerous. She still praised his courage. She called the alchemist and asked to quickly process bloody cuts. Kraft used a basic medical manu to clean the wounds. He noticed the rupture of the artery. Kraft realized that it could no longer be delayed. He believes that ordinary army infusions will not help. You need to try a new elixir. Summary of the diagnosis. The patient has severe blood loss. There are no medicines. There is no healer nearby. Kraft had only one chance. He decided to test his remedy. The bodice brought a green elixir barrel. The alchemist took a bucket of thick fluid. He poured the infusion on the wounds and prayed silently to help the formula. The couple rose clouds and covered with vision. It seemed that the experiment failed. Jotaro suddenly jumped on the stretchers. He was surprised that he did not feel pain and was very easy for him. The hunter opened his eyes wide. He examined his body and did not see any crack on the skin. The bodice did not believe. A minute ago he was on the verge of death and now stands without any damage. Gitero thanked the alchemist. He acknowledged that the drink exceeded all his expectations. Kraft was glad when he saw a healthy blush on the young man's face. The bodice still doubted whether this healing was natural. Although the hunter was convinced of his health, the alchemist advised him to relax. Blood loss still required rest. Kraft tested the pulse and color of the mucous membranes. He was surprised because the tincture very quickly restored blood. After the examination, he ordered Jotaro to stay in bed at least until dawn to monitor the possible complications. A minute later, the young man already wanted to go to work in the field, but Persia stopped him and reminded him of caution and discipline. The workers were surprised when they saw the patient yesterday at work. He said that the elixir quickly helped him to rise. Persia realized that the potion was important for the army, but immediately thought about political consequences. She asked the alchemist not to disclose this secret. She said this story is very delicate. She invited Kraft home for talking alone so that no one was heard. The security guard nervously spoke about the fierce struggle for the Margraphic estate and energy sources. Every advantage there is very valuable. She said that such a strong potion could cause a new conflict between the clans. The alchemist agreed to keep the recipe in secret. The bodice also decided not to tell nothing until the true value was clear. Persia said she would turn to Kraft direction if it was very needed. It will temporarily send any messages to the management. She returned to the guard of Kyle and Mina. At this time, the bodice displayed brigades for the erection of a protective fence. The alchemist thought about the cause of wounds and decided to talk to the jitter. The young hunter had a good combat experience. Kraft was surprised that ordinary goblins were able to hurt a person with such a level as he had. Persia understood the intentions of the alchemist and allowed him to investigate the details of the fight independently. In the field of Kraft saw Jotaro. He worked harder than usual and was ready to go hunting at any moment. The alchemist doubted whether the goblins were injured. He heard that the hunter's mosh was finally broke. He became wondering why the steel cracked so quickly. He asked to show the fragments of the blade. Gitero said the wreckage in the barn. He promised to relax after work when he would do several hundred push-ups and squats. In the workshop, Kraft carefully inspected the broken blade. He immediately realized that the cause of the breakage was not in the wear of the metal. Machete Jotaro was very bad. Even after repairing the bodice, his blade still remained brittle. Kraft decided to strengthen the weapon with the help of alchemy. There are still many mana crystals in the storage. He picked up several stones and started working. The hunter at this time boasted that he quickly recovered. Gitero shot his shirt. His skin was smooth without any scar. Friends exclaimed. He asked not to depreciate craft elixirs. He believed that infusions were a real miracle. Comrades said jokingly that even a miracle potion did not save from pain. They advised the hunter to be careful and not rush to feats. The bodice just warmed the mountain in its smithy. The alchemist came to her with a request. The girl confirmed that repairing broken tools. Kraft decided to join the experiment. He gave her a flask with a dark solution. It was an alchemical oil for metalworking. It is an essence that hardens and can strengthen any blade. She is known among the masters, and it surprised the bodice. She said simple blacksmiths could only dream of this component. It is created only by alchemists. Kraft was happy when he heard it. He realized that he created very rare material. The bodice explained that the effect of oil depends on the stamp of the master. With mana crystals, the result will be the best. The alchemist confessed that he did not know the blacksmith. He will enthusiastically watch the work of the head of the guild, even if it is small. The girl joked that the temporary smithy was imperfect. She promised to work harder. This caused a genuine admiration for Kraft. The bodice took a new oil, lubricated the blade, and hardened it on fire. Jotaro waved a new machete. He cut down a thick tree in one movement. The hunter was glad and waved with a blade. Kraft asked him to stop because it was dangerous. The bodice lifted the weapon to the sun. She looked carefully at the blade, interested in the result. The steel was very solid, without any crack. It bent almost like the best mithril blades. The bodice realized that if the sword was only solid, it would break like glass. But bad steel, along with the alchemical oil, gave a strong effect. Kraft suggested trying another novelty. He took the flask with the second olive batch. She was cooked while the bodice hardened machete. Jotaro rubbed the blade with a black liquid, considering it protection against rust. The alchemist smiled and asked to test it in practice. The hunter waved a new blade. The tree broke easily like dry straw. The chips flew around. Kraft applauded with joy. Compared to the previous test, the blow has become much lighter and cleaner. Gitero was glad. Now the logs were easily cut like glass. The alchemist did not have time to tell the properties of oil because something unexpected happened. The young hunter did not calculate strength and cut off the whole tree with one blow. He did not even notice how his blade cut the trunk. Everyone has frozen for a few seconds, looking at the fallen giant. Then everyone was noisy. The boys laughed at their luck. The bodice, however, realized that they have not just a mash in their hands, but a combat relic. It must be monitored and be careful. She thought it was a legendary oil. Kraft agreed and said that too much fun could be dangerous. The main blacksmith strictly warned, no longer joke. Any error can lead to serious injuries. The alchemist calmly apologized. Gitero thought about new feats enthusiasm. The bodice forced him to promise to be careful and less frequently arranging demonstration fights. The guy did not listen to her and ran to praise a blade. Workers noticed how the blade glitters and easily cuts logs. One lumberjack tried to swing and almost fell. The bodice closed her face with palms and asked to stop immediately. She asked Kraft how much the effect would last. He replied, the day with normal use or half a day with heavy load. If you lubricate all rural tools, the vial will be enough for a week. The alchemist said the crystals in the stock were enough. The bodice reminded that in order to continue the experiments, you need to seriously hunt monsters and look for new stones. She forced Kraft and Gitero to promise not to carry out dangerous tests without warning. Then she looked strictly at Alfred with a sword. The next morning, the alchemist woke up very tired after night work. He, with bags under his eyes, went to the well to freshen up his face. He impatiently for a walk to breathe fresh air and think about how to complete a party of new elixirs and oils. Kraft slowly walked the street to freshen up. Suddenly, he heard the deaf moan from the Kyle room. He cautiously looked into the hole. He saw the boy shuddering in a feverish sleep. He sweat and he squeezed the blanket. The hero engulfed anxious anticipation. Realizing that something should be done, Kraft quietly called the young lord. He wanted to reassure him. Suddenly he felt a warm hand on his shoulders. It was Persia. She showed not to wake up sleeping. She sadly said that such attacks often occur in Kyle. The elixir of endurance gives him several hours of rest. When the action passes, the body is again covered by fever. Kraft realized that the boy's condition was very difficult. His body is weak, and every attack takes a lot of strength. Persia said that doctors suspect her heart defect, but there is no accurate diagnosis. Therefore, you just need to protect it and look after it. She said with sadness that she could only help with strength and dedication. She believes that this is not enough to change the situation. Kyle turned to the alchemist. Kraft promised to help him as best as possible. He perceived it as a challenge and decided to create a special decoction. This broth had to support a weak heart. Young Lord became almost his brother. Therefore, he had no right to retreat. The hero read the ancient herbalist carefully. He learned that the necessary plants are only in dangerous swamps. Now it is clear why such drugs are rare and very expensive. It is almost impossible to collect the necessary ingredients. There were sideways on the map. Kraft went there for intelligence. After reaching the edge of the forest, he saw the snakes of snakes. They twisted between the vital sedges. The magic of the Myelson allowed you to see predators from afar. It was not necessary to approach close. Among them were 7-headed hydra. They managed the swamp and patrolled the territory as living towers. The alchemist realized that he would not be able to break the necessary herbs unnoticed. Each hydra will keep most of the mire. When Kraft returned to the village, he met the bodice. He explained that he went on herbs for the elixir, but in the right swamps he could not find them. Plants grow only in stretches where terrible hydra lives. The hero still does not understand why it is there. At lunch, he noticed that these monsters see too wide. They do not beat them with one blow. The bodice was anxious. The hero noticed that she is worried. Hydras usually live in swamps. The girl apologized for her emotions. She remembered that there was once a settlement of 2. It was probably destroyed through the hydra. The bodice clenched his cams and said that everything is more difficult than it seems. The destruction was caused by a wave of attacks of high-ranking predators. Kraft was surprised because the hydra rarely leave the swamps. The attack of a whole pack was unusual. The girl barely held back emotions. She confessed that the monsters were still nearby. The hero sincerely sympathized and showed that he understands her pain. He wanted to collect herbs despite the danger. He decided to bring a minimum of people with him to avoid fights. The bodice took him for his clothes and said she would go together. She promised not to overload herself. Kraft asked her to be careful. The girl just smiled and reminded that he was an adventurer himself. She promised to follow all the instructions. The hero smiled in response to her. After that, they decided to collect the rest of the team for a short expedition. In the House of Workers, Kraft explained why a hike was needed. He did not mention Kyle's disease. Kraft emphasized that only volunteers needed. Persia stood away and was thoughtful. Others hesitated, did not dare to raise their hands. In the end, she agreed. Alfred was at first surprised, but agreed to look after the children until it was. The girl thanked and promised to return soon. Alfred agreed to take responsibility. Gitaro also wanted to join. Kraft was worried about the guy's safety because his friends looked at him silently. Gitaro said he would stay behind with the bow. The bodice and Persia will cover the craft mag in front. The alchemist agreed, 4 are enough, the main thing is to act together. The bodice continued to look nervously at the weapons of comrades. Before sending, Kraft recalled, we take a minimum of things. He hides everything in the spatial storage so that it is easier to run from the jam. Persia was in the light armor of the personal guard. It annoyed her because the alchemist looked at her carefully. This time the bodice put on almost complete armor and took a big hammer. It surprised Kraft. He worried about her mobility. The girl said that the weight of the equipment would not hurt to show her skills. To dispel doubts, she quickly performed several smart movements. Kraft apologized for distrust. Jotaro boasted his best gathering happily, but looked rather like an avid robber. The alchemist advised to at least remove the eye bandage. He reminded to lubricate the arrows with oil. It is necessary for each shot to be deadly. If the plan fails, you can always try again. Kraft asked the band to be cautious and not risking. Persia confessed that in the army, these remedies are used only as a last resort, but now they will have to rely on elixirs and oil. The alchemist said not to hesitate when it comes to life. Materials are enough, so the risk is justified. The security guard became more confident after these words, and for the first time smiled heartily. Kraft. It looked reliable. Jotaro again spoke many compliments of the older sister. Persia was almost angry. The route was chosen to avoid Hydra. Loud blows or strong spells could attract new monsters. The bodice distracts the Hydra in front. Persia sneaks from behind. Gitaro covers from afar. Kraft reinforces magic. After collecting herbs, we immediately retreat. It is impossible to delay. The bodice tensed. From the side of the swamps there was a hiss. It was a danger signal. She showed to stay quiet. Somewhere near the reed was moving the scales. Soon it became clear that the giant Hydra kept large prey in the rings. It was a huge crocodile that she was about to suffocate before eating. The bodice was quietly gripping to the Hydra. She hid behind the tree trunk. The snake-head Hydra greedily torn the prey. After the girl's signal, everyone looked out of shelters. The monsters were more than Gitaro expected. Kraft suggested quietly retreat. The team appreciated their strength and decided to act on the plan based on the endurance of the bodice. She took a blow and stopped a large Hydra head with a smithy hammer. The snake rolled back. Jotaro was surprised. Despite its fragile physique, the bodice stopped the monster. She showed strong muscles and accurate techniques. Her artisan coat of arms did not prevent her to train combat techniques. Over the years, she became a strong warrior, although she was a blacksmith. Persia rubbed the blade with oil. She quickly went round while the Hydra was watching the bodice. The phoenix wing cut the air. The scales became fragile as an old bark. The neck of the monster could not stand. The head of the great Hydra fell quietly into the swamp mud. The heavy body fell side by side. The bodice quietly retreated as a step not to get under soil shift. Gitaro joyful ran to a dead mascara. He was struck by the strength of the blows of allies. Persia looked at the sword and noticed his shiny edge. Steel easily cut the body like warm oil. The hunter got a shimmering manasistal from the wound. The bodice and Kraft looked at each other, evaluating the prey. The blacksmith became excited. He laughed softly through his teeth, as if trying to hold back joy. The bodice suddenly ran forward. She left the associates in surprise and raised a cloud of swampy splashes. Persia and Kraft ran after. They told the Jotaro to stay side by side and guard distant flanks. The girl was circling and waving with a hammer. Her laughter was ringing and joyful. The second Hydra fell, without having nothing to do. Friends with anxiety watched how a girlfriend cheerfully struck. Each time she cut off pieces of snake flesh. The bodice seemed to be intoxicated. She beats again, another head falls. Swamp water is mixed with steam. The girl rejoiced and friends were afraid. They were aware that the next battle could be uncontrollable and threaten the whole group. Persia and the bodice were circling in the vortex of Phoenix. Kraft and Jotaro only watched them, holding their breath. One of the Hydra realized that the enemy was stronger and began to flee. The bodice quickly rushed out of Ding. She threw her over her shoulder. You will not run away. She quickly tore a monster on many pieces in her eyes. Snake skin flaps fought about the swamp nearby. Gitara warned Kraft to be careful. The alchemist did not pay attention to and called it just a show. In a few minutes, a large bunch of torn hydra appeared in the swamp. The bodice and Persia were finally breathing. They looked around and saw the surprised views of their friends. The blacksmith seemed very threatening. Her gaze made Kraft and Jotaro feel cold. The bodice apologized to breaking the plan. The partners were not angry because the result was great. She gladly said that she finally avenged her destroyed homeland. Kraft sincerely pleased the glow of happiness in the girl's eyes. Persia also wanted to thank the alchemist. While the bodice beat the monsters, Persia only supported. Without Oil Alchemist, this would not be possible. Kraft joked the compliment was embarrassed by Persia. She blushed and didn't know what to say. Gitaro recalled that they did not collect herbs. Persia almost told Kale's disease, but stopped in time. Kraft immediately changed the topic. He asked not to spread rumors. The hunter looked with suspicion, but said nothing. The alchemist returned and prepared the legendary balm from disease. It needs to be tested. The bodice believed that the potion was safe, but the fact that there was no clinic nearby alarmed. Kraft tried the potion last night and did not notice any side effects. At this point, Persia was alarmed and asked if the panacea was ready. She said she was ready to check the medicine for herself, even if she had to get a cold under the waterfall. Kraft imagined a girl without clothes under a cold shower. The strict look of the bodice quickly returned him to reality. Persia said she had been training under the waterfall for years and never got sick. Therefore, the experiment does not make sense. The alchemist annoyedly said that another volunteer was needed. At this point, the young people called Persia to Kyle. The scene was unexpected. Everyone stopped immediately and looked at the smiling Kyle. He saw several bottles on the table. He became interested in and reached out to them. Persia was alarmed by a young lord. Kyle immediately realized that these new infusions were made for him. Kraft confirmed that these are therapeutic elixirs. The guy sincerely thanked the alchemist for concern. Kyle took one bottle and immediately drank its contents without waiting for permission. The audience was surprised by the guy's audacity, and he exhaled lightly. Everyone tried to stop it because the potion was not yet checked. It was estimated that it was safe. Young Lord said that he was trusting faith and courage. He is not afraid of risk. In a few minutes, he said he was feeling better. Persia and Alpha'd have cursed with joy. The bodice noticed that Kraft was not happy with everyone. He quietly went to the exit. He turned, looked Kale in his eyes, and asked not to pretend. The guards were surprised. Kyle said he was already feeling better. The alchemist insisted on checking whether it was true. Lord whitened with disappointment because Kraft sincerely asked not to lie. The alchemist explained that fictional miracle can create false expectations and harm the whole community. Persia and Alpha did not understand why the magician changed the tone dramatically. They were indignant with his behavior. Kraft apologized to Persia. He confessed that only half was sure. The infusion may not overcome the congenital Kyle ailment. The elixir really treats colds, infections, and other diseases purchased. But with regard to the violations with which the baby was born, his effectiveness is doubtful. Even experienced doctors cannot cure this heart defects. One serving of potion will not help. Tears appeared in Persia in his eyes. Alpha gently reassured her. He understood that we needed to look for a real solution. Kraft had an idea, but it took time. He said of it while Alpha'd reassured Persia. The alchemist apologized to Kale and allowed to use only endurance elixirs. Kyle agreed and promised to tell the truth. Kraft smiled and was about to go. He was stopped by friends who wanted to find out. Persia apologized for the cry. It was too excited. Kraft said he was not offended. Emotions are normal. She instructed him to protect the village and take care of Kyle's health. The alchemist accepted it and asked him to trust him. The girl squeezed his hand and led to Lord to rest. No one knew that even the legendary potion would not help. There are no doctors nearby. Even Margreric doctors cannot help because of a strange congenital heart defect. Kraft hopes the new formula will help. If not, he will have to look for other, more dangerous methods. Now endurance elixirs only help to survive, while we build a village and strengthen protection. He proposed to create his or her own adventurers to get defenders and resources. The bodice was surprised but agreed. She believes that strong warriors, shops, and housing will once be needed here. The alchemist showed a record. It refers to a potion that accurately treats Kyle's disease. The necessary herbs grow only in distant places. Other rare materials can only be obtained in battles with monsters. He opened the herbalist and showed a drawing of the desired plants. The book states that these herbs only grow in the underground houses of dragons. Kraft asked Kyle to suffer a little, he promised to find medicine. A new caravan group got to the borders. They have long and hard. On the way, they repeated several times from the monster. This land is called the Land of Monsters, so they hired armed security. One of the mermaids is that there are only a few shacks ahead. When the conductor stopped suddenly, the mercenary hit his forehead. Travelers stopped. They were in front of them with almost 30,000 inhabitants. The city was lively and evolved quickly. The men looked at each building and did not understand where they were. There was even a well with clean water in the village. The bodice met the newcomers on the border. She reminded that development lasts only half a year. She smiled and said that experienced craftsmen gathered here. Together they will create an exemplary settlement. The guests vigorously agreed. Kraft noticed that there were more people in the village. Thanks to the Adventurers Guild, pioneers and adventure seekers come here. A young knight in Latin named Reddick congratulated Kraft. He rejoiced an unexpected meeting. Once they traveled together, the alchemist thought that a friend was protecting the caravan, but Reddick remained for another reason. He laughed and said he would now live here and help the village. He liked the surprised reaction of a friend. When asked why, the knight answered simply, "There are many monsters, and with the new settlement there are supplies nearby." Reddick was embarrassed and confessed that he regretted the departure of Kraft. This repentance did not last long. They grew together, but over time the group went on. The magician left behind. Thus began a number of painful transitions. Kraft felt superfluous and left his comrades like a fugitive that could not keep up with everyone. All the teams with him happened the same. Now the memories forced him to tremble. Reddick explained that the imbalance prevented everyone. Because of this, they had to disperse, though no one wanted to. In addition to the self-proclaimed magician, Kraft was called another nickname, which he did not know. The knight calmly said that the newcomers called him a mentor of beginners, but did not say it aloud. They grew due to the patience of Kraft. Expelled him, they felt guilty and never confessed. The alchemist mentioned their joint journey. He began to understand what happened outside the explicit decisions. He was hard to believe, but the face of ancient comrades showed that they were really awkward. Kraft thought he had not succeeded as an adventurer, but he realized that some appreciated his efforts. Reddick looked at a friend and thought, how many more stories remain unsaid? It may have been time to rewrite them together. Reddick decided that it is best to redeem the past with honest work for a new settlement. He shook his hand and asked the group to trust any job. The village grew rapidly. This was mainly due to the creation of adventurers. There have always been many monsters on these lands. The hunters remained here for a long time because it was profitable. Together with the aliens, a business appeared to meet their needs. More people came every day. The bodice has already apologized for the lack of free rooms. All masters began to expand the hotel. Workers barely had time at a rapid pace. There was a big turn in front of the shop with elixirs and weapons. People were pushing louder. Some asked the oil, others wanted a healing potion. The Siler's owner was confused because there was nothing on the shelves. Her courtesy helped to relax. Some even asked her to move to see her smile. The young adventurer grabbed his head. There were no oil. The friend suggested to borrow it if the adventurer helps to hunt the Hydra. They immediately agreed. Then Kyle called Kraft to talk. The alchemist poured tea to all in the negotiation. Then he asked the case. Kyle sat down by Mina and said that it was time to give the settlement a name. Kraft was surprised that they were still without names. The young man was completely serious. Previously, the settlements disappeared so quickly that they did not have time to name. The alchemist joked and suggested the name Kalovka. Persia and Alphud were given the same advice. Lord respected Lord for his merits, so they would like the name. Persia nodded so vigorously that she almost fell. But Kyle suggested another. The village was built by everyone, so it should not carry his name. He suggested giving him a common name. Persia sighed, there are no options yet. Kraft realized that there was no point in arguing. We need to look for a new, better name. The hero asked for advice from junior sister Kyle. Mina proposed to name the Kraft Willa settlement. Kraft did not accept this idea and waved. Kyle gladly clapped his palm. He praised his sister, but the alchemist suggested a different name, Liffin, in honor of the chairman of the guild. However, the mine remained in its opinion. Lord confidently said that the main merit belongs to Kraft, so the name should be his. But the alchemist, having abandoned this idea. Persia was dissatisfied, but agreed with the owner. When Kraft called her a vain chatter, she almost strangled him in the arms. They knocked on the door. She came in the bodice and apologized for having come without permission. She saw the alchemist on the floor and wanted to leave, but he asked her to stay. The blacksmith sat down at the table and joined the discussion. She immediately suggested the name Twilight Village. Persia came out because it sounded as a decline. The bodice just smiled and looked at the coat of arms of the Twilight Alchemist. She said that the settlement was thriving thanks to the craft. The name is related to its important role. The alchemist was confused. Persia agreed unexpectedly. She said the gloomy symbols suggest the border, although they were reminiscent of danger. Kyle continued his opinion and suggested the name Svitinoki Village. It symbolizes the beginning of a new day and a fresh exaltation. The bodice agreed. Dawn is well suited for the outpost that is only created. Persia found Lord's decision correct. The girls turned to the mine. She blushed and nodded. She also likes Dawn. It is decided that their home will now be called Svanka Village. Persia said the name glitters like gold and is well suited for the inspired Heil. Kraft was a little embarrassed and scratching the nape. The bodice went to draw up documents. Kyle quietly said he had dreamed of Kraft Willa. The alchemist pretended not to hear him. Later, Kraft decided to plan a new mining raid. He went to the bodice to discuss details. In the forge, he saw a girl who sorted documents. He immediately said that a new expedition for ore was needed. The list included iron, copper, mithril. If you are lucky, it is also adamantium. The alchemist unfolded the map. He showed a cross with a cross. According to Guild, there you can find rare veins. The bodice was pale. Her hands shuddered when she kept the papers. The bodice is covered with cold sweat. She knew why she couldn't go to the marked mine. Kraft noticed her anxiety. The alchemist suggested that she support the adventurers through the guild and pay it from the Dawn budget. Steel picks will be made for ore extraction. They will be aggravated by hard oil and covered with oil. They lived in the bodice snow. The girl glanced suspicious. She felt that Kraft was hiding something. He apologized and promised that the test was safe. It's just a small alchemical experiment. Subsequently, the team was assembled. The bodice looked carefully at Kraft as if she had suspected him. Reddick shook his hand alchemist and thanked for his trust. Gitero suddenly wanted to join. Kraft allowed, because in the forest the extra bow will not hurt. They go for ore. This is their first step to rescuing Kyle. Reddick joked that the bodice seemed to be watching the alchemist. The alchemist just shrugged and said that there were reasons. On the way, the leader suggested briefly to mention the team composition. His name is Reddick. He is a sword with the coat of arms of the knight. The bodice was surprised because she recognized the ancient craft partner in it. The salt was presented to the following. She was a strict ranger with a shrill look. She apologized for her scary eyes and nodded briefly. Reddick joked that she had a solid character. The salt looked at him dissatisfied. Kraft smiled. Since they went to the raids together, a long time has passed. Once the alchemist felt sympathy for Salt, but Reddick was constantly ahead of him. Kraft realized that the Salt likes the sword itself. The Salt was a little discord, shaking her hand, and said that the Council of Cooperation. Reddick said further, Bipple is thin. He is a priest and healer. In black clothes, magician. The giant with an axe is a warrior Graham. Everyone nodded as a sign of readiness. Kraft remembered their roles. The detachment gathered and moved to the spine marked with a cross. They are looking for rare metals, danger, and perhaps medicines for a young lord. The priest Bipple shook his hand. Their greetings were warm. Magician could skillfully use the magic without Greb. It surprised Kraft. Warrior Graham is chunky and silent. He only nodded strictly. He does not like to communicate. Jitaro spoke forward, called himself a hunter, and said that he was glad to help everyone. Reddick joked as if the boy had been taken from the street. Gitaro replied that he was in the best hunting clothes. Kraft cheered the young man, but admitted that he still looks like a traveling robber. The band laughed, and it only aggravated jokes. After a brief acquaintance, the detachment went into the forest. On the way, they killed small monsters. Reddick asked if all the fired materials could be taken. The bodice confirmed, the prey gets to the one who is beating. Kraft said the team was working better than he thought. Reddick said success was due to endurance elixirs. Salt added that these elixirs allow her to shoot from the bow without stopping. The alchemist took out a small vial from mana ponds. This is a rare elixir for mana recovery. Everyone is surprised. Legendary drink is given free. Kraft asks to be careful because there is little drink. Reddick joked that now he was not terrible, even Cyclops. Kraft asked not to invent extra. The bodice was the first to see a narrow entrance to the cave when they entered the thicket. The alchemist was hesitant. The girl showed a pendulum. The crystal on it glowed brighter. This meant ore nearby. Kraft and Mess have created balls of light. They illuminated the wet walls of the transition. The column gently went forward. Initially, the grotto seemed empty. Narrow passes were forced to go with each other. The drops fell from the ceiling. The lizards were rushing on the walls. Salt asked Reddick not to push. Reddick apologized. The bodice used the vision and light of drops. She confidently led a detachment into the dark. Under the ground, they were waiting for the desired veins. The bodice checked the soil under his feet. Kraft gladly noted that it could be fully relied on. He hoped that this cave would not be dungeons. Reddick reassured that there was no foreign aura. It is a common natural cave, not a real dungeon. The dungeons live strong monsters. There you can find valuable artifacts. Many treasure hunters dreamed of getting into these places. The cave became wider. Reddick stopped everyone suddenly. Kraft also felt a danger in front. On the left were 3 stone lizards. Kraft has not seen them before. They were large and their skin is as strong as a bull. Reddick quickly gave orders. Graham in the vanguard. The salt covers the rear. The rest supports the raiders. Graham holds the shield and prepares for the attack. Lizard attacks with the open mouth. The stroke on the shield was very strong. The monster flew back and swallowed on the stone floor. The salt pulled the bowstring and shot. She thought, the lizards are strong, but these are just lizards. Let's see how they can withstand her arrows. She greased the tips with sharpness. She aimed directly at the head of the biggest. The arrow pierced the skull of the monster through, as if it were glass. Reddick was passionate about saying that everyone is doing very well. The salt agreed and added that these monsters were not a problem for them. Graham and he continued the clearing together. They impressed the monster without hesitation. A few more strokes, and all the lizards fell to the ground without power. The salt decided that it was over and turned to Reddick. Reddick examined the bodies and confirmed that the battle was over. It is necessary to collect the materials quickly and move on. Kraft watched from the side and smiled. The team worked harmoniously. He used to have another coat of arms and traveled with them. He tried to learn something. The life of the adventurer now seemed to be a distant memory. Reddick smiled and said that the lizards did not become a serious obstacle for them. Kraft replied that without him, beginners would have escaped for a long time. Reddick laughed and said that the oil had also influenced the severity. It cannot be underestimated. Salt arrows were deadly. The Graham axe easily cut the lizard armor like the knife cut the oil. Kraft agreed. Reddick is right. With a new coat of arms, he became different. The swordsman warned, one coat of arms is not yet a reason to relax. He himself will check the skills of Twilight Alchemist. The bodice went on and saw that the breed had changed. White metal splashes among the debris. She felt that there was a mithril. It surprised Reddica. He had already dreamed of armor of this metal. She lived insignificant, so the girl suggested going on. Kraft agreed with her. In a few dozen steps, the drop became brighter. The bodice stopped a detachment with a gesture. There was a spacious hall ahead. She ran forward and called everyone to look at the find. The blacksmith's eyes burned. The walls of the large chamber were covered with crystalline spires. The bodice approached the nearest block. Kraft looked around and could not hide his surprise. Everyone, even Reddick, went between the glowing pillars with the open mouth. The dreams of mithril became a reality. The alchemist praised the blacksmith for good work. The bodice had already imagined that she would be able to expel from this wealth. The admiration was replaced by fear when a big eye appeared in the dark. Reddick shouted Lifa to escape. The roar escaped from the darkness. A single giant with his teeth rushed directly at the girl. In a moment, the Cyclop was very close. He was muscular and kept a huge mace. The monster stood in the shade of the hall and waited for the prey. His only eye burned the desire. It lifted the stick and aimed it on a small blacksmith. Reddick ran, closed the bodice with a shield, and pushed it back. He ordered her to retreat. He looked around and called Graham to help keep the front. Salt and bodice should go away for a safe distance. Magician already created a combat spell. Bipple was preparing a prayer of support. The battle with the master of the cave began. Everyone was lined up. Reddick commanded to fight. Graham swung with a giant axe. The blade slid on the skin of the Cyclop like a solid shell. Kraft was surprised. The blow was not harmful. The one-eyed giant evaded and counterattacked. His heavy hand with a mace encroached on a detachment. Everyone bounced back. Graham lifted a shield, but the blow was so strong that he threw it on a stone floor like a doll. Reddick rushed to a friend, but Kraft stopped him, putting his hand on his shoulder. "I will cope," he said. He ordered the Bipple to maintain a spell. He rushed to the unconscious warrior. The alchemist poured a bottle of legendary potion on wounds. Graham's body enveloped a thick steam. In a few seconds, the cuts disappeared. The warrior got up, collapsed with his hands, and looked at the healer in surprise. He clenched the shield firmly and rushed again. Reddick, noticing it, said, "Craft potions are a real miracle." The Cyclop was very fast. The swordsman shouted, "Salt, eye is our goal." The ranger restored strength, but the monster was moving too quickly. She couldn't aim. Reddick tried to cut his tendon on his leg, but Cyclop quickly bounced and laughing at people. The mace cut the air again. The battle became one-sided. Kraft thought they were losing. He quickly remembered the spell. Fire and wind in a tight cave are dangerous. He has not mastered the spell of land. He raised his hand with the coat of arms and decided to take the risk. Comrades looked around. Around Kraft appeared icy crystals, which quickly gathered in a sharp spear. The ice wolf calf flew forward and punched the chest of the Cyclop, preventing it from reacting. The monster froze. The icy sting stuck out of the wound. A crust of ice was quickly formed around it. The detachment froze with surprise. They have not seen such magic from Kraft yet. Reddick lifted the sword and ordered, "Salt target, Graham cover." He, along with the warrior, evaded the blow. At this time the ranger pulled the bowstring, preparing to make the last shot. Reddick evaded and cut the muscular hand of the Cyclop with his storm blade. Then he used the reception, wolf-hot blows. Together with the salt, they climbed the torso of the monster and made the reception of the joint autopsy of the rock. At this time, the ranger took a convenient position and released the arrow right. The Cyclops froze. He swayed and began to fall. Reddick shouted to everyone. He retreated, and the icy giant with a roar fell to the ground. The detachment looked at the fallen enemy for a few seconds. Then they realized what happened. It was their victory. Reddick grabbed Kraft by his shoulders and said, "We did it." Graham smiled too, though he grunted something indistinguishable. Gitero was glad to defeat the monster. The bodice jumped and said it was a great power. Bipple also praised the team. Kraft modestly said, "It's all because of your coordination." The salt denied, "Without your ice fang, we would have fought for this giant for a long time." Reddick nodded and said, "Recognize that this is a new witchcraft. The alchemist has just shown unusual magic." When Reddick took his eyes, Salt seriously said that Kraft attack was decisive. They only achieved the frozen target. The alchemist was amazing that his magic was finally needed. The bodice said she could now work with ore. Reddick agreed, because it was for this purpose that they came. While the warriors cut valuable materials from carcass, Kraft and bodice talked. Graham licked his lips and imagined how he wear armor made of cyclopope skin. Bipple clamped his nose because he felt a sharp smell of blood. The bodice waved Kraft. She kept the pick and wanted to get more mithril and other ores. After a while, the blacksmith filled 4 tubs of ore and still wanted more. It was difficult to punch the inner wall. The ordinary pick could not break this breed. Kraft suggested to try a secret weapon. He got a strange metal cylinder. The bodice fell. "What is it?" "Alchemical explosive charge. It explodes through Manny," he explained. "Stop, it's dangerous," the girl said. Kraft smiled. "Until we press the heart, we are not threatened." The bodice sighed. "I am not worried about myself, but for the cave." The bodice stopped him and said that the invention was not tested. Kraft calmly replied that it was safe here. The girl insisted that everyone would move away for the rock. Gitero was eagerly jumping. Kraft repeated that there was nothing wrong. Reddick was surprised to be anxious because the alchemist was still a miracle. The bodice said, "You have not seen his inadvertent side." She seriously asked to remember her words. Kraft gathered everyone and promised that the charge will be like firecrackers. He inserted the cylinder into a narrow gap and started counting. He smiled, seeing the concern of the blacksmith. The team instinctively covered their ears, preparing for the explosion. The cave shook a loud explosion, which responded to the moon in the depths. A strong wave of dust rose up. Bodice and Salt closed their eyes. Small stones hit their helmets. Several people dropped back. The blacksmith said quietly, "I warned." Kraft coughed, stood up, and saw an angry, stuffed bodice. In her view, it was clear. Apologies were not enough. He was glad that he did not check the device on the Cyclop. Only icy dust would be left of the monster. The girl swung heavily, but Kraft stopped her in the words, "But the breed is now easier to break." The bodice sighed. "If you insert the charges into the holes made, the explosion can be controlled." She mentally called it a storm. The alchemist immediately called it a genius, but the blacksmith stopped the compliments with a harsh glance and said, "You jokes." Kraft's heart was badly killed, but he only nodded. Other team members also made comments. The alchemist received from them a 2-hour lecture on caution. In the morning they went back. All were goals, though a little embarrassed. The village was already aware of the victory over the Cyclop. The children joyfully gathered around mithril barrels like a festive trophy. Kraft and his detachment among the noise felt like the true heroes of the border. Kyle and Mina met at the gate. Lord warmly greeted his wife after the expedition. The alchemist uncertainly explained where the angry Kovalik disappeared. When traveling merchants learned that the team had found mithril, they froze in surprise. Everyone immediately surrounded the bodice and began to offer her an advance. The girl did not have time to say anything how people began to fall asleep her about sale. Some tried to bargain, others immediately gave money. Kyle realized that the merchants were ready for everything for rare metal. He suggested waiting for a report to the arrival of the bodice. The hero agreed and sat down at the silent younger sister of Kyle. She usually sat by her brother, but this time she left. Kraft was surprised. The girl did not look into his eyes. It was difficult for him to understand her behavior. A shaped bodice came into the room. She apologized for late and began a report. The bodice looked tired. She said she had barely escaped from merchants. Kraft noticed her disheveled hair. She immediately corrected him. The blacksmith sat in the main place. She immediately launched a report. She described the cave. There were stone lizards, fireflies, and giant beetles. They met all this during intelligence. 5 reasons for rapid success: magical explosion, severity oil, special storage, accurate calculations, and elevators. The girl was squeezed, hearing praise. She acknowledged that everything was possible without injuries due to the cohesion of the group. She said that the elixirs of endurance were the most important. Without them, they would not be able to defeat the Cyclop, which was considered the killer of newcomers. This monster has always pursued its victim to the end. Unprepared had no chance of surviving. Kyle was glad that this time everything succeeded. Kraft lifted a cup of tea and suggested thank you for support. He felt attentive views. Everything seemed to be waiting for him. He asked Kyle what to do next. Kyle advised not to sell mithril in the village. The bodice agreed with this idea. She explained that a revolution among the masters occurred in the Myoful. Those who have not been able to cultivate mithrils have suddenly learned to do it. Demand has increased sharply. Therefore, it is necessary to sell only at the highest price. Kraft also asked to transfer some of the equipment to local adventure seekers. Kyle agreed and said it was a good idea. He immediately suggested making a plan. Thanks to profits, the Redoc detachment quickly updated all its equipment. Then the bodice decided to start melting mithril into ingots in the morning. Kraft agreed, but first asked her for one service. A few days passed. The hero worked with potions. The bodice loudly called him to the workshop. She was proud. The order is ready. You just have to look. Kraft finished notes and quickly approached her. The girl stepped eagerly from her foot to her foot. The young man also wanted to find out if their expectations would live up. In front of him was a new alchemical pot with beautiful patterns. Kraft grasping a thin thread and a coherent shape with enthusiasm. It was a real work of art. The blacksmith blushed from a compliment, but quickly offered to move the boiler to the alchemical room. The hero took his hand. Inside, something struck a spark. He released him immediately. Easy crackling has become a strong flow of knowledge. He completely covered the young man's consciousness. The bodice was frightened when Kraft fell. Kraft explained that he has a large influx of information in his head. The girl remembered how she felt something similar when she created her first model of skillful work. New knowledge seemed hot, but the alchemist realized that they were useful. He smiled and suggested that he immediately try the boiler. The bodice sighed in surprise. Kraft poured 2 different elixirs into the vessel and fed into the mixture a wave of mana. Sparks flew from the boiler. They were reflected in the girl's eyes. In her look there was a delight. The thick couple rose to the ceiling. The bodice decided that the process was over. The alchemist only nodded now. As a result, they created condensation oil for mithril. Frequent hardening makes the metal very solid. The girl checked the contents and confirmed its high quality. The hero gave her a test bottle. The bodice, inspired, hurried to the forge. Kraft stayed with the book and waited for a decision. Soon the door opened. The blacksmith from the threshold reported the news. A new hammer, a new anvil, many ideas for weapons. She rejoiced in new opportunities. The young man said it was her merit. The bodice insisted that everyone should thank the Twilight Alchemist. Kraft asked her to stop praise. Everything was possible thanks to the case, but if the bodice is happy, he is also glad. The blacksmith immediately returned to the mountain. She said it was time to quit a few more. She quickly disappeared in the workshop, murmuring that there is a lot of work. It was in vain. The girl focused fully on her business. 2 months have passed. One morning, Reddick came to the alchemist. He said their intelligence had brought results. Kraft asked the details. The swordsman put an emboya flower on the table. It was a legendary celestial bud. The hero took his breath. Kyle and Alpha have frozen in surprise. They first saw such beauty and did not know when the detachment gained a rarity. Kraft smiled. He just instructed Reddick to check the rumors. Everyone looked at the radiant petals. Persia stood on the side and believed his eyebrows thoughtfully. Reddick unfolded the map and showed the route. The path was long. They identified the accurate coordinates of the lawn of the Ambrosians. The alchemist warned that you should not focus on the pace of their detachment. With elixirs, they moved faster than the horses. It will take almost a month a regular expedition. He asked about the guard of the place, and the sword said there was a monster. They tried to approach unnoticed, but the dragon noticed them. It's a real dragon. It is green, without wings, with a panzer scales. His strength and endurance in the bastion. Hearing this, Kyle, mine and guards papped. The green dragon is a nightmare for any hunter. Kraft soberly assessed the situation. The danger is great, but now they know the enemy. This is half a victory. Kyle stopped the conversation. He wanted to make sure that friends would not mindlessly attack the monster. Reddick confirmed that they discussed this strategy before the battle with the giant. The young lord was frightened and asked to stop. He believes that fighting with a dragon is too dangerous. He does not understand why it is needed. Kraft took the embrace. He needs many of these flowers. They are the main ingredient of the elixir that can cure it. Persia immediately realized they need a dragon to get the right amount of flower. The alchemist said confidently, they will defeat, gather the ambrosians, and make medicines that cure Kyle forever. Lord is moved but denies. He cannot allow friends to risk life for him. Kraft leaned down and said quietly, we're not just friends, we are a family. The family does not leave their own when one of us needs help. Kraft involved such a reaction, but Kyle was unwavering. He did not want to risk the lives of friends for the sake of Kraft. This is too big a sacrifice for him. Persia respectfully told young lord that she was ready to give his life for him. Kyle understood it well, but could not change anything and wept from impotence. He confessed that he would not take the medicine if they have to sacrifice loved ones. Such a burden is too heavy for him. The words struck everyone, but the alchemist did not change his thoughts. Kyle is a caring leader, but now it's not just about his health. Kraft slipped the map and asked to look again. The dragon's den is right in the way of the future road. The green dragon blocks the path that connects the dawn with two neighboring countries. Until it is defeated, development is impossible. The task is double, to protect the settlement and find the main ingredient for the elixir. Alfred carefully asked if the dragon could be defeated. He mentioned that even armies avoid fighting with such creatures. Kraft pointed to the team. These are experienced fighters in strong mithril ammunition. They have legendary elixirs. They have everything to equalize the chances. Lord still disagreed. Persia reminded that the chance to cure the disease is given only once in life. The alchemist added a second argument, 2 ready-made elixirs that will give Margrave and nobles to increase Kyle's authority. The guards nodded approved. They understood the benefits of the state. Lord looked at them with despair. The responsibility pressed him even more. He asked for a break, but Persia and Alfred had already agreed to help Kraft and suggested acting on the plan. Kyle became angry and ordered them to remain silent. He did not want to be used for heroic actions. The guy pulled Alfred to the cloak and kneel. He pleaded to listen to him. He does not need glory if she needs to give her life. Tears trembled on his eyelashes. He felt guilty before the battle. Persia tilted her head. Kraft took a deep breath and promised that the battle would be carefully planned. He said the risk would be minimized. The alchemist calmly said, the road and your treatment are our common goal, not your buzz. He reached out of support. Kyle trembled, but hope appeared in his eyes. If friends think everything, he will try to trust them. There is no solution yet, but the first step is taken. Young Lord asked a little time to think. The characters were prepared for the most important mission of Dawn. Kyle tilted his head. His tears fell to the floor. He asked everyone not to risk his life. Persia almost cried. Alfred sighed hard. Kraft realized that he said unnecessary. He stood in front of a young lord and quietly apologized. The alchemist gently stroked Kyle on his hair. He promised to show a plan that would help overcome fears. In the yard, he called the jitter and asked if everything was ready. The hunter replied that he was ready for battle. There was enough space here, so Kraft allowed you to start. The bodice again alerted and asked to stop the experiment. The hero reassured her. This device has already been tested many times. He said that the show was only needed for Lord calm down. The blacksmith breathed heavily and left. Look carefully, he whispered to Kyle. You'll be surprised. Jotaro pulled the bowstrings of a new mithril bow and charged an arrow with a microcharge. The guy aimed and let go of the bow. The arrow hit the old tree. There was an explosion that broke the silence. Cods and earth climbed into the air. Kyle looked with his eyes wide open. The rest of the peasants also froze. Kraft recalled Lord of the Magical Explosion, which was mentioned in the report. Now it's a version for arrows. If you cannot put a charge, it will be shot. The bodice shoots from a strong mithril bow. The projectile flies far and accurate. The dragon cannot get closer. Kyle acknowledged that weapons were impressive, but still worried. Persia confidently said that there was a chance to win. She bowed to Lord and asked for permission to join the detachment. Alfred also bowed to support a colleague. Kyle fell. Even the most devoted guards are ready to take risks. They bowed below and said it was their conscious choice. Kyle sighed and lowered his eyes. Kraft said quietly, "They love you like the whole village. Everyone is looking for medicines, but they did not want to give in vain. Now it's time to try together." Kraft smiled and said, "Lord, that all Dawn residents were ready to fight for his health." The alchemist confidently said, "Let us save you." Kyle wiped tears and aware of his weakness. Persia wept, but friends supported Lord and smiled at him. The guy confessed that he was most afraid to influence his decision on the fate of friends. As the head of the village, he had to be strong. He allowed the mission to fulfill, but put one condition. He asked the detachment to promise to return whole and alive. Kyle clenched his fists and barely restrained tears. Kraft put his hand on the heart and solemnly promised to fulfill the request. After that, the preparation was completed, an appointed day of the speech. In the morning, Reddick called the alchemist to the gate to show him something interesting. There was a large group of volunteers adventurers at the gate. They wanted to join the dragon hunting. Participation in this promised glory. The most important thing is the opportunity to help Kale and Dawn. Kraft felt pride and gratitude, looking at decisive faces. The bodice smiled and said that they would protect the village themselves. The alchemist nodded and fully entrusted her. When the detachment moved, the mine approached Kraft and grabbed it by the cloak. She said for the first time, "Come back unharmed." Kraft stroked her on his head and promised that they would return together. The adventurers lifted their fists and shouted a battle cry together. Reddick gave the command to go. The heroes' detachment went on a trip to the Green Dragon. They reached the outskirts of the mountains and stopped. They examined the terrain to choose the best way to attack. One of the adventurers raised a far sight and noticed in the valley of a large green giant who sat with their back. The scout's eyes expanded. Everyone who first saw the monster was frozen from shock. Before them lay a real green dragon. He was barely moving, resting. His greatness was visible even from afar. Reddick had already met this monster and felt fear again. He asked Kraft whether all the equipment was ready. The alchemist confirmed that the preparation was completed. "You can start." Reddick announced the first phase of the plan. He warned, "If something goes wrong, you need to retreat immediately. It is impossible to hero." At his signal, adventurers rushed forward like an avalanche. The dragon heard the roar and turned his head on the sound. The monster noticed a detachment with weapons alert. It returned to the opponents. Reddick shouted, "Attack!" Persia immediately moved with him. Reddick helped the sword using a flying dish. Persia attacked the fast heavenly spear. Salt and Jotaro released arrows greased with oil. The arrows were stuck in the air. The dragon noticed that he was surrounded. His scales glittered. He prepared for blows. Reddick struck the sword heavily and left the bloody red scratch on the paw of the beast. The monster struck and bowed his head. A thick, dark liquid flowed from his wound. The sword encouraged the detachment and ordered to move forward. The fighters increased the pressure. The dragon lifted his head up. The alchemist realized that a pillar of fire would now appear. The flames were already gathering in the mouth that glowed with hot light. It's time to act. Kraft struck his palms on the ground. A giant shield of the earth rose before the detachment. Kraft prepared to intercept the deadly breath of the dragon. The strong wall between the dragons and adventurers stopped the fire wave. People were saved by a protective miracle. Doc asked everyone to focus on the plan. Kraft restrained the fire with a magical shield. The flames from the walls had to return to the dragon. The fire was to be reflected from the barrier and wrapping the monster on all sides. The wall of the hero has already begun to crack. Kraft realized that she would soon fall. He warned Reddick. He immediately realized that he had to act decisively and quickly. Reddick shouted the detachment and ordered the preparation of explosives. Several inventors were shot by special arrows in the dragon when he was still hiding behind the barrier. Several precise blows led to a strong explosion. The explosion shook everything around. "The shooting is over." A wounded dragon crashed through the destroyed wall. Perjek said everything was fine. According to him, the beast seems to be weaker. Success inspired. It was necessary to move on and not stop. Reddick ordered not to restrain himself. The archers started shooting the dragon again. The dragon felt heard and roared again. His roar was so loud that the earth trembled. The dragon's body flashed bright light, and everyone was forced to close their eyes. A strange magical seal appeared in the air above the beast's head. The dragon's horn lit up. Adventurers prepared for counterattack. The bright flash made them hide behind the shields and close their eyes from light. When they opened their eyes, they saw that the dragon was stationary. He raised his head, but nothing happened. Kraft looked confusedly and tried to understand why the beast activated the magical circle. Everyone was lost. It seemed just an empty threat. The jitter shuddered and said he was scared. Then he pulled the bow and brought the arrow into the head of the monster. The arrow touched the dragon's horn, stopped in the air and fell to the ground. The attack did not work. Gitero tried to use magic, but she also did not work. He was surprised because the spell did not work. Kraft began to understand what a flash meant in a magical circle. The dragon was not moving. The hero realized that the monster used protective magic. Kraft called Radak and warned, "Light can cancel any magic, even attacks. If this is true, they do not yet know all the enemy's strength." Radak decided to leave. He turned and tried to tell others. He did not have time. The dragon lifted his head and began to inhale the flame, preparing for the attack. Kraft was scared. From such a distance, the earth shield will no longer help. Smoke came from the dragon's mouth. The hero looked at everyone and ordered to retreat. Everyone trusted him before. He could not let anyone die here. Radak shouted during the retreat. He asked them to act immediately. This was the only way to remedy the situation. The boys were surprised that Kraft was asking for this. They had no choice. The share hit Kraft with a shoulder. The edges turned on the acceleration. Both attacks hit the back in the back. He shouted and flew forward with great speed. The hero rolled on the ground and hurt several times. Then he stopped. At this point, the dragon opened his mouth and released fire. Kraft gathered the last forces and activated the technique of a large earthen shield. All adventurers quickly fled from the scene. They barely escaped a deadly fire. The hero was breathing hard. Sweat flowed from his forehead, but he managed to protect everyone. Sora looked at the monster frightened. She felt that all efforts were in vain. Hope disappeared. Among the adventurers, there was confusion and despair. Sora fell on her knees and said they would not be able to win. The hero also hesitated whether to run away, as it could lead to loss. At that moment, he was called bye-bye. She decided that this monster has a weak place. She told the hero that if you cut off the dragon, he would no longer neutralize magic. Georgia suggested a plan and asked the hero to press the monster's head to the ground. Kraft didn't understand what she was going to do. The girl took the sword. She said it is a formal god Persia. She promised to try to perform the idea. She rushed to the attack and demanded that Kraft lowered the dragon's head. At this point, she had to cut off the horn. The hero understood her plan, but it was very difficult to do it. Magic did not work. Kraft had no plan. He noticed an arrow with explosives. It gave him an idea. He remembered how Jotaro had shot an arrow in the dragon. The arrow hit, but there was no explosion. The explosion was to be a magical attack, but it was blocked. This means that physical attacks work. They have a chance to win. Kraft hesitated. Other adventurers hid behind rocks. At this point, he was approached by Radak. Reddles were convinced that if there was at least one chance, it should be used. Otherwise, everything will get worse. He was ready to sacrifice himself from the very beginning to defeat the dragon. It was worth it. Kraft looked painfully at friends who fought to the end and risked their lives. The young man clenched his fists and apologized to them. The hero called everyone and said, "Stay a little more until the end." Everyone prepared and obediently agreed. While others fought with the monster, Kraft drank potions. He said he rests on all. It is time to combine forces. He thought and realized that they could still use magic with mess. This means that the power of the dragon's antimagia is limited. The capacity of the monster probably acted only near or with delay. Kraft realized what to do. Noticing that the dragon wanted to attack the fire again, he warned others. Persia stopped and said she would stay in her place until the end. Other members of the group again activated a large earth shield and protection against fire. Radak shouted that they would cover mess. It is necessary to stand and keep the defense to the end. At that moment, the dragon shot fire. The burning flames struck directly into the mess shield. She stood confidently, and her friends covered her from behind. Kraft had to fight himself when the fire burned it from head to heels. The hero realized that even with the support of Radak group to handle it is very difficult. Friends were scared of him. The whole body of the young man was in burns. He could not get up until he reached the recovery potion. Kraft came a little to his senses, and for the pain he apologized to everyone. He went to his feet with the help of his comrades and asked how they had. Smoke began to settle. Kraft saw Radak with mess on his head. All were alive. He thought that only real crazy could resist such a monster in the city. The boy's gaze fell on the dragon again. The dragon inhaled the air for a new attack. Kraft said quietly, "Timid." The dragon lifted his head. A large stone was already hung above it. Kraft knew that this moment had come only through the efforts of all his friends. He took the opportunity and accurately threw the boulder on the head of the dragon. If the magic did not help, power had to be used. The stone hit a monster's neck. He was pressed to the ground. Kraft ordered Persia to act now, without delay. The girl caught the bottle and immediately drank his contents. It was a special potion. Persia felt that it temporarily opened new opportunities. Kraft was sure that everything would work out. Persia quickly ran to the dragon and cut his horns with one strong blow. The monster was raised with pain. The girl began to fall forward. The hero was worried about Persia. The girl clenched her teeth and stood to the end. She told him not to worry about her. She asked him to finish this battle quickly. Kraft exclaimed that the dragon's protection disappeared. He said it was time to strike the last blow. Now they beat their best. Kraft had no doubt that it was the finale. All the shooters prepared the arrows and opened a dense shelling. The hero used heavenly thunder and a rare hit of the rock. All the attacks, along with the arrows, hit the dragon at the same time. The edges put a dot. He struck a decisive blow. Subsequently in the village, it was rumored that Kraft and his detachment had returned. People gathered at the entrance to the village. Kyle and Alfred stood in front and were eagerly waiting. Some of the peasants looked at the tired and wounded boys and thought whether they really won. The woman covered her mouth with her hands, frightened by how many they could lose. The characters were in a good mood. Kraft said they all returned. Kyle approached Kraft, took him for his clothes, and wept with joy. He was happy that Kraft was alive. Kraft asked him not to hug so firmly because he was still painful. They approached the bodice. She also cried and said that he survived a lot. The bodice rejoiced that Kraft had returned. The hero agreed and was already going to report. The bodice stopped him. She said that the main thing is alive. Kraft did not understand and looked at Radak. The edges only shook his head. The bodice said that everyone remained alive. She believes that retreat too boldly. The bodice is convinced that they fought worthy. The hero wanted to win faster. He opened the spatial storage to show the main proof. Suddenly, the head of the dragon fell from the air and made it difficult to hit the ground. Everyone froze with surprise. The hero said that the subject was very difficult, so he hid him in magical space. The bodice fell from surprise. She was amazed. She almost lost consciousness. Kraft realized that he had done too sharply. He could not believe that everything ended like that. People shouted that the head of the dragon was here. When the head was put on the square, the bodice closed his face with his hand. She didn't know what to say. She did not want to offend. She asked to imagine herself in her place and look from the side. Kraft was ashamed, and he sincerely apologized. The hero did not even realize that everyone was so surprised. At this point, Mina suddenly stood on his knees. Kraft was embarrassed that his legs were seeing, but did not dare to ask her to stand up. He imagined that Mina was looking at him in surprise and asks why she could not sit. Kraft ignored her own words, allowed her to stay, and thanked quietly. Kyle suggested that everyone get together and discuss the situation. The story began. Kraft described the battle with a dragon. Their equipment was severely affected, but victory was given without casualties. The bodice did not believe that they returned unharmed and won the dragon. The hero said they completed the main task and collected enough flowers of embroice and rare herbs. The main purpose was to win, but they also completed a side task. They found a lot of expensive ore and magical objects. Kyle has entrusted with guild life. She promised to control everything. Kraft suggested that Radak talk about the battle. Radak agreed and started with magic. Mina smiled and listened silently to their conversation. When the night came, the peasants led Kraft and Radak to the center of the village. A sign of victory over the dragon hung on the wall. The hero did not understand what was written there. Jataro waved Kraft and called to see how they were preparing for the holiday. In the middle of the field lay a large chipped head of the dragon. Jataro said it looks interesting. Kraft thought it was reminiscent of a dark ritual. Kyle went on stage and spoke to everyone. Thanks to their joint work, they deprived these lands of one of the most dangerous monsters. Previously, this territory was called the Land of Monsters. All attempts to settle here failed. Now, after victory, you can safely expand the settlements. Kyle thanked everyone. He thanked the settlers, merchants, heroes, and adventure seekers who performed this great feat. He briefly suggested to celebrate the victory over the dragon. The peasants raised the mugs with drinks. Kyle lifted the mug, did not spill the drink, and suggested drinking for victory. The evening was a holiday. Bodice and Kyle were happy to eat. Radak communicated with several girls. Sora looked at everything with jealousy. Alfred and Kraft was constantly drank. Persia was persistently treated, though she refused. When Kraft departed, he was called. It was an edit. He smiled and said that the hero had probably drank well. Kraft calmly replied that it was not true, but Radak did not realize that Kraft was actually worried. He said they had won one reason. Kraft looked left and said he did everything he could. Reddick smiled. The hero does not even understand how many people and equipment prepared. Victory was only possible through this training. Kraft looked at the coat of arms on his hand. He said that all merit belongs to this little thing. He easily ran his finger on the bright lines and quietly said that he could not fully thank his brand. Reddick nodded. He just had to agree. The sword said that even without the coat of arms, Kraft would come up with something else. He had an organizing talent since childhood. It is difficult to imagine how it was, but Reddick was convinced that he would still collect adventurers and finish the case. The hero smiled, recognizing that his friend was right. He looked at people who rejoiced in victory. He realized that this was achieved by his own. As Reddick said, this time's success depended on Kraft. He thought about it, went aside, and sat on the grass. Then he looked at the starry sky. The quiet steps were heard behind. Someone noticed he was alone. The bodice was holding a mug in her hands. She joked that the hero was already drinking. The bodice sat nearby. The girl asked if the dragon's death means the end of the attacks. Kraft recalled how monsters destroyed the village of Lifa as a child. He calmly said that the threat is less now, but still exists. Now the chance of repeating the tragedy is very small. This is already a victory. The bodice smiled and looked at the dawn. She leaned quietly against Kraft's shoulder. Warm tears of memories rolled out of the corners of her eyes. The hero sat silently. The blacksmith shook and breathed in his arm calmly. A few days of hard work passed. Kraft finally finished the main creation, the elixir of life. Kyle was surprised. The paste was thick as cream. This time, the alchemist did not work as usual with simple potions. Kraft took a spoon and said, "The medicine should be drunk because the disease is congenital. Treatment begins from the inside." Persia and Alfred were surprised and worried that the consequences could be. Kyle ignored their doubt. He confidently took the spoon and swallowed a thick elixir. He was ready for any result. Everyone began to ask Kyle how he feels. Persia and Alfred were worried that he could be worse. Kraft said it was an exaggeration and reassured them. Kyle said he only feels the sweet taste of the cream. Then he opened his eyes in surprise. The guards faded, thinking something bad happened. The boy had tears. Persia asked what happened. Kyle replied quietly, "On the contrary." He squeezed his shirt near his heart. The pain and exhaustion that has tormented him all his life has disappeared. Kraft was shocked. He saw a guy on his face. He rolled small tears on his cheeks until he was hugged by someone's warm hands. Persia and Mine hugged Kyle. They rejoiced together. Persia cried with happiness. She always believed that this day would come. The three stood for a long time, hugging firmly. Alfred wiped the tear from the eye. Kraft smiled and left quietly. Alchemist was catching up. He turned to him and bowed silently, because the words of gratitude were not enough. He confessed that he did not know how to thank. Simple thanks is not enough. Kraft was glad that the medicine was led without complications. Alpha had agreed that the potion was truly amazing. He regretted that there is only one bottle. Several doses could completely destroy the disease. It would be the perfect result. Kraft smiled and said, "One, actually." Alpha had stopped and did not believe what he heard. The alchemist opened the side door and showed a table. There were vials on the table. 129 siren to enhance the abilities, 73 Amy, an elixir for rejuvenation, and 47 doses of kale medicines. The scene struck everyone, Kyle too. Lord holds his head. He regrets he was crying. Persia grabs Kraft for Latcan and blames for stupidity. The alchemist recognizes that he has overdo it. Kyle said these rare potions could be sold very expensive in the capital. Kraft noted that the problems would not be avoided. Therefore, the treasures need to be transmitted directly to the Margrave of Beeler. Persia with Alfred was surprised. It was an unexpectedly wise proposal. Margrave Baylor has already called his eldest son for an urgent conversation. In the office of Margrave Baylor, his father met Zaid and gave him a new letter from Kyle. The eldest son was waiting for the younger to complain again, but his father said that everything is different now. The Margrave was reporting and saying that Kyle wrote something incredible. He just looked at the lines and almost dropped the parchment. The message wrote that the detachment defeated the dragon and carries the legendary elixir. The elixir was cooked from the collected herbs. It should be presented personally with decent. The hero with his comrades will soon arrive on Baylor's land. Kraft slammed Kylo on his back. He proposed to show their achievements in all this time. The young lord gathered with thoughts and agreed to the alchemist's plan. On the way, Kraft looked out the carriage window and said that he really liked local landscapes. Ever since he was here, a long time has passed. Kyle was glad to learn that his older brother had already helped here. Persia's face became cloudy right away. Lord mentioned that one could not talk about it at others and apologized. Persia was surprised and did not understand why he was saying so. Kraft made it clear that everything is not as easy as it seems. Kyle once asked the hero to call him his brother and be treated with respect. Persia strictly said that Kraft does not perceive the title too seriously. The alchemist smiled, thinking that it should relate to Kyle. Jotaro looked at the big city of Margrave. Kyle said that the capital is even greater, there are more people. The gate is always open in the capital, and the duty is not charged. If the hunter knew it before, it would be here. Lord suggested that he look around while there was time. Jotaro agreed. Kraft watched the boy and wondered his boldness. Persia only smiled and said, "You are no less bold." The bodice looked silently out the window and admired the landscapes. Their crew went forward. At the gate, they were stopped by armed guards. They asked if they were related to the estate of Margrave Baylor. Kraft did not understand at first what was happening. Persia explained that it was a regular review. Alfred confirmed that they were invited inside. The guards were advised to go bypass because the main street was overflowing. Alfred thanked them for their service. Kyle looked out of the carriage and also thanked the soldiers. The guards saw the young lord and lost. For a moment, everyone subsided. In the next moment, the soldiers came to life and congratulated Mr. Kyle with his return. He really looked very healthy, it was true. Kyle smiled and said he was feeling great. Alfred said it was a short visit and it was necessary to remain silent. The guards were understood and promised to keep a secret. The accompaniment sat in a carriage. Kraft looked out the window at the landscapes and the shine of the sea. The crew finally arrived at the main gate of the ancestral estate. Kyle confessed that he rarely visited because he grew up in a rural residence. Jotaro said the nobles were infrequently returning home. The bodice was strictly asked to be cautious. Kyle said he didn't need to worry. He is ready to show his father's report because everyone prepared him together. The young man sincerely thanked his friends for their help and smiled at everyone. Jotaro smiled in response and praised the kindness of Lord. Kraft noticed that Persia closes his face, hiding emotions. The bodice said it was time to leave. Kraft asked Mind to free his knees, but the girl did not want to get off. The hero decided that it was not necessary to go to the palace with the baby in his arms. The blacksmith said softly, with a smile, that Mina seems to have really leaned to him. Kraft only surprised his shoulders. When everyone came out of the carriage, the guards ordered the gate. Kraft and Mind followed a calm. Jotaro was glad and ran to the yard. Persia reminded him to behave politely. Zaid looked out the window and was already waiting for his brother. His face was visible irritation and contempt. He clearly did not delight Kale's return. Soon the guests were taken to the castle. They were greeted there by the relatives of the young lord. Markgrafr Baylor sat at the head of the table. Nearby was his eldest son Fraten. There was a second son near him. The father said he received an interesting report. He wants to hear an explanation in person. Kyle confirmed that he came personally. He has a lot to tell and show. Zaid was annoyed but did not show it. The Margrave told his son first to tell about victory and achievements. Kyle politely asked Kraft to show the elixirs of his father. The alchemist felt the excitement under the strict look of the Margrave, and his hands tremble a little. Kraft thought it would be better to leave the final. He felt he was pale. Kyle nodded to him cheerfully. The hero pulled out the first box from the repository. On the table lay 44 vials of elixir, 129 bottles of sirens, and 73 bottles of Amy. Zuid was starving. Sweat appeared on his temple. He has never seen so many liquids in one place. The Margrave held a letter from Kyle and lifted his eyebrows in surprise. Such quantities are serious. Young Lord said he didn't need so much wealth. He decided to give the treasures to his father. Baylor, understanding the value of victory, told his son to be proud of himself. It was a real feat. Kyle's eyes were illuminated. He thanked his father for his kind words. The Margrave said that part of the potion should be given to the king. The rest cannot be sold immediately so as not to affect the market. Fraten's eldest son has already viewed Amini, who return youth. The father changed the topic to the dragon. He said elixirs are just indirect proof. He asked if the evidence was more convincing. Kyle calmly said, "We brought the dragon's head." The Margrave was surprised to be transported without a cart. Lord showed Kraft and said, "She is in his spatial storage." Fraten lifted his eyebrows because it seemed incredible. The older brother died and clasped his eyes cunningly. I doubtfully wondered and said, "I'm afraid that he calls the dragon an ordinary large lizard." With seeming courtesy, he said that the younger just learned to exaggerate. This is how real aristocrats behave. Baylor suggested watching the trophy in the garden. Kyle denied that the backyard was small. Fraten smiled and offered the main yard where there will be more viewers. "Let the people look if the dragon is really so great," he said, annoying Persia and Alfred. Jotaro whispered that without family connections, the two would have received kicks for a long time. Kraft said that even a large garden would seem small. The trophy will break all flower beds. He laughed and said, if so, let them break. The father was tired of controversy and allowed the show in a large front garden. Kyle thanked him for his understanding. When everyone went out to the lawn, Kraft saw the Zeta Palace window. He was eagerly waiting for the start of the spectacle. The alchemist intensified his voice with magic and turned to passers-by. Dear, I ask a moment of attention. The crowd immediately responded to his call. The bodice was surprised how clearly the words were to hear. Kraft was convinced that everyone was looking and opened a repository portal. A huge head of the dragon, which covered the half-lawn, fell on the ground. Fratton stopped laughing. The crowd exclaimed. Loudly announced that the third son of Margrave, Mr. Kyle Baylord, recently had a great feat. Thanks to his wise leadership and unity of the detachment, it was possible to create a settlement in the land of monsters and defeat the fear that frightened people around. Ordinary words were not enough, so people saw everything in their own eyes. Kraft solemnly proposed to honor the young, promising ruler. At that moment, a large head of the defeated dragon fell behind Kyle with a loud roar. The scaly trophy raised a cloud of dust, almost touching the facade of the estate. The Margrave and all those present expanded their eyes as they saw this picture. The crowd came out and began to shout joyfully, raising his hands. People were surprised by the beast and admired him. The children were happy that the hero belongs to them. Kyle looked at Zaid. I will have to put up with my skepticism. The girls behind silently flicked with eyes. Kraft surprised everyone again with his approach. The alchemist hoped that this time he did not overdo it because he gave a warning in advance. The locals gathered around the trophy. They asked each other not to push. The soldiers quickly were ordering. They aligned people in the queue. They reminded that the trophy would not go anywhere. One of the managers sighed because the work became more. He thanked Kraft for warning. Kyle apologized for inconvenience. The Margrave led the guests to a large hall and invited to sit down. Lord Kyle jokingly suggested taking money for inspection of the dragon monument. The father said he could not rush. Without preparation, it will be dangerous as a powder barrel. Too much noise can lead to chaos. In the end, the Margrave decided to convey the consequences of the formal office. They had to develop a safe plan. Kraft has already heard about this official. From the expression of Persia's face, it became clear that it was an important person. Baylor praised his son and said Kyle won the dragon well. Kyle thanked. The Margrave was bowed to the allies. Alfred said it was an honor for him. There were already 1,000 inhabitants in the settlement reports. The dwellings were not enough, so the new displaced persons stopped taking. Goreed reluctantly listened to his brother's success. Suddenly, the door opened. Someone broke in the middle of an important conversation without permission. All views turned to the entrance. The chamber tried to stop them, but the Margrave went to the hall with another noble lady. Both were silent and hurried to join what was happening. The Margrave nodded to the woman and said, Ledded, Rila, we have an important conversation. Grino's wife replied that she understands everything well. The lady still wanted to speak, although it was inappropriate. Kyle quietly explained this craft. They are facing the former second wife of her father, and now the first lady led. Next to her, her daughter Rila. She led the mother of Zeta. She led her half-face with a fan and said that she also had the right to speak. The Margrave reluctantly agreed. The woman said Kayla's merits are very great. He shone even more than when his friends greeted. Kraft was surprised by this reaction. She said that the new settlement was growing rapidly. This is the merit of the young lord. Fratton agreed that there was true. Zaid noted that the village was near his possession. She said that it is better to transfer the management of the settlement. The hall became quiet. Kayla was engulfed by the cold. Zaid smiled a little. The mother just said the obvious. There was a wild, deserted territory between the estate and the village. Kraft realized that this proposal is illogical. The Margrave was silent, so she led to him again. She recalled that the medicine helped Kyle overcome congenital weakness. Therefore, it is better for him to stay and help his father in the capital. This seems a good reason. The stepmother used power to strengthen her son's position. Zaid supported this plan. Kraft realized that he wanted to pick up the results of Kyle's work. The younger lord wanted to deny, but he interrupted him. He said that the disease has passed and no need to worry. It is better to entrust the cases more experienced, that is, to him. Zajid laughed quietly and looked at his brown brother. Fratton was silently watching everything. Then he asked the word. The Margrave listened carefully to him. Fratton supported the mother's idea. He suggested that Caleb give another, still unobtrusive possession. He nodded as a court cartographer and said, "Show us a map." The bodice saw the royal map and was very happy. Kraft thought that not everyone was allowed to see it. Fratton began to look for a new pioneer on the map. Fratton pointed to the cross on the map. This is a place, along with the former dragon's home. This area was near the Dubatan Empire. The mountains were Zebius Federation. There were several small states between them. It was the perfect place for development. Brother believed that Kyle was doing a good settlement. Therefore, he suggested that Kyle's development of this region. The Margrave was thinking about the proposal. She spoke quietly from the front of the hall. She thought Fratton degrades her son. He hints that he will not cope with the task. But Fratton disagreed. There are so many responsibilities. Creating a new settlement is a very difficult task. The Reela agreed. She believes that the brother's idea is good. If both of the projects start at the same time, it will be immediately visible who is capable of. The mother smiled happy and praised her daughter in her view. She thought it was a chance for Kyle to show that his success is not accidental. Kraft, listening to it, restrained anger. Everyone seemed to despise Kyle. Finally, Kyle voiced his decision. He accepts the proposal. Persia, Alfred, and Leifa were surprised. He laughed loudly, not understanding when his brother became so intelligent. Kraft did not understand the reasons, but noticed Kale's confidence in his eyes. Kyle stood up and said he had two requests. The first is to leave the name Golden Dawn. The second is the question of Kraft and the peasants with whom they have experienced a lot. Kyle wanted anyone who desire could go with him. According to the law, peasants cannot leave their regions on their own. Only some settlements had such a right. This required permission. But she waited immediately. They cannot pick up neither resources nor property. Kyle surprised this decision. He stood up sharply and turned to. The stepmother asked how to go to a new land without supplements, but she insisted there will be no permission. Kyle asked to allow the guilds and people to pick up their property. The Margrave asked her son if he was satisfied. Kyle replied that he agreed in this case. Zaid laughed and said that the issue was resolved. With a mocking smile, he added that Kyle finally acts as a real aristocrat. Kraft did not understand anything and asked softly why Kyle agreed. Kyle only winked him and smiled. Kraft immediately realized that Kyle had conceived something. The Margrave waved his hand. He announced that the meeting was completed. All got permission to go out. Everyone started to go, but the Margrave stopped Kraft and asked to stay. He invited him to come later. Kraft felt cold on his back. The Margrave quietly drank tea and waited. Hero Kraft finally came in and apologized. Then he sat down. He sat down at the table. He uncertainly lifted a cup with tea and made a sip. The Margrave looked at him all the time. The guy felt embarrassed. Kraft began to panic. It was difficult for him to tolerate this silence. He very much wanted the Margrave to finally said something. He started talking. The man finally replied and suggested that the guy was one of the Twilight Alchemists. He heard that the young man understands medicine and knows a lot. Kraft thanked these words. Margrave asked if he had heard something about Galen's jar. The guy was surprised that it was about this person. He knew that the Jarwal was an outstanding alchemist. She made a breakthrough in the fertilizer. Jarwal was also a well-known healer and writer. Kraft's eyes lit up when he thought of her. He read all her books. He closed his eyes and imagined her good grandmother. He was surprised when he learned that this legend was a Margrafer. He did not understand why she was serving him. Margrafer thought she would be interested to meet Kraft. He showed her the way to a mansion. Kraft bowed and said goodbye. He promised to come. As he came out, he sighed lightly. The conversation was very nervous. Before leaving, the Margrave asked him. The hero was surprised by an unusual request to take care of Kyle, but agreed. They completed the task. Subsequently, the carriage with the hero and the duke came to the mansion of a Jarwal. The old house, covered with ivy, looked abandoned. The trees were heard from the trees. Kraft looked at the eerie landscape. A wooden man came behind and asked him to go. The hero shuddered. Before him stood a living wooden monster. He realized that to create such a very high level of alchemy. He followed the creation and thought that the Jarwar was probably capable of such. The wooden guest looked around and said the landlord, who brought Mr. Kraft. It was annoyed from the room. He was late, but let him come. Kraft came quietly and greeted. He thought that he was a jumper before him, but when he lifted his eyes, he was surprised. Before him sat a Jarm. She looked like a girl, a little older than him.